My time on the boat taught me a lot of things about work ethic and learning how to live outside of my comfort zone. But most importantly, showed me all the little things in life that people tend to forget. Just being able to look out a window is a great feeling.
I love you. Keep going, man. You got it. Just being able to look out a window.
I will never forget my experiences aboard the submarine. And I am able to appreciate the little things in our daily lives that much more.
Thanks for sharing that, dude. I appreciate you sharing that.
You're listening to Dyergrams.media, your home for useless content. In this episode of the Dyergrams podcast, we're going to go ahead and talk to my friend, Erato, who worked as a nuclear engineer on a submarine for one tour. I believe it equated to somewhere around 5 to 8 years. And there's a lot of kind of cutthroat shit here. It's not so beautiful in some parts, and if you're afraid of explicit content, then I highly recommend you go ahead and skip this episode. It may not be for you, but if you can stomach some of the, what I would call finer things in life, then go ahead and stick around. All right, let's get into it. All right, guys, so my buddy here, Aaron, is a former nuclear engineer on a submarine for the U.S. Navy. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Aaron.
Hi, guys. My name is Aaron. Again, ex-nuclear engineer out of the Navy, submarines out of San Diego.
Sweet. So, just a little bit of a pretense, just so we can go ahead and open up the conversation. How and when, why did you decide to go ahead and go into the armed forces?
My parents were actually against it for a while there, because they both came from the armed forces, and they told my brother and I not to do so. But my brother ended up joining 2 years before I did. He was an OS, so we worked with computers and networking and whatever on ships and on land-based commands. But 2 years after he joined, I went to the recruiter's office because I wanted to join. And the guy who recruited my brother actually saw me there. He came up to me. He's like, "Hey, man, like, I have a really good program for you. I think you'll like it." I want to preface this with, he knew that I was a straight A student in high school, and that's generally what's required before even getting offered the nuclear program in the Navy.
So you have a buddy, in Air Force who's a weapons tech, and that's one of those things is like, if you apply yourself early on, or even just decide to start applying yourself when you get into the armed forces, it counts for a lot if you can first off kind of have that military attitude, be disciplined, but also, if you're actually capable of passing the test, the prerequisites to level yourself up.
Yeah. So once he pitched that to me, there's so many advantages with going into the nuclear field. You start at a higher rank than everybody else. You get an automatic rank 6 months in. You get extra pay. And then if you volunteer for submarines, you get extra pay for volunteering for submarines as well. That's the only way to get on the submarine, is to sign a contract saying that you volunteer for submarines.
Gotcha. And why do you think they do that? Just because it's a harder position to fill, maybe?
Yeah, because I don't know if anybody knows if they're claustrophobic before they step on a submarine, but they definitely find out.
Hell yeah, dude. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's some major struggles there. No, but given that, and the fact that you were, clearly intellectually curious, at least at a young age, so you were able to step into that position. The military obviously loves that. How did you get into the actual engineering side?
Well, Well, they once you sign up for that program, right? It's a 6 month or a 6 year mandatory contract. Generally, most contracts are 4 years. This one's 6 because they take you and they train you for the first year and a half, just about year and a half to 2 years. And after they train you, they want use out of you, so they make you stay for those extra 4 years of actual service. So like the training for me, boot camp's always at Great Lakes now for the Navy. It's only at Great Lakes now. So that's 2 months, and then you go to what's called A school, which is the first 6 months of training. And the first 6 months is going to be classroom style learning. They're called accelerated courses, because you take a 16-week college course in 3 weeks. You run through the whole book. There's a test just about every week. Nothing on the test is multiple choice. Everything is essay answer. So it's a lot of memorization and regurgitation on the tests. And for the first 6 months, you take one class at a time. It's kind of like your warm up, right? Because the next 6 months of training is also classroom training, but you're taking 2 to 3 courses at a time, right? My physics class was 3 weeks. I hate physics. Never got to take it again.
We all do.
But it was intense because you had to learn so many equations for whatever they asked you for, right? And there was no notes to help you, nothing. You just had to remember it.
Yeah, gotcha. And especially for those positions, it's kind of the funny thing. So just to kind of go off on a little bit of a side note, it's like, I know especially for Elon Musk and SpaceX, like they're only allowed to employ American engineers. So it's one of those things where you can imagine when you go into, that environment, they do on the job training because they actually are only going to train you for a very specific thing. They don't want,
Yeah. But yeah, and what's interesting about that, right? Knowing you're going into this field as a straight A student, the other people that are also in this field were also straight A students. They're some of the smartest people I've ever met in my life, right? And that's where, like, they call them the cream of the crop, right? They're smarter than 90% of the rest of the U.S., basically.
To be honest, and to be honest, it's like that's why they employ, and they also recognize that they can get people who don't necessarily have the destined path, and they can bring them in. I don't want to say
they're young and trainable is what you're saying. Yeah,
exactly, and they're intelligent, but maybe this is just the best path for them. So let's go ahead and kind of take me onto the submarine for your first time. You know what I mean? Because
there is some. Can we go back? I want to still talk about the schooling.
Oh, absolutely.
It was extremely intense. It was a lot of stress. A lot of people that were. There was actually a decent amount of people who flunked out. There was only 1 or 2 in my first 6 months that flunked out based on grades, and then the rest were because they were 21, they drank too much, right? Got into trouble, or they were underage and they got caught underage drinking. And then on another note, the stress was so high that there were actually suicides during that first year of training, at the commands. During my first year, I went through 3 suicides. I didn't know any of them, but like that's how high this stress is. And a lot of people tend to flunk out the second 6 months of that training, just because the first 6 months is about 9 hours a day of schooling and 2 to 3 hours every day afterwards for homework. And then you have 2 to 3 hours on Saturday and Sunday for homework as well. The second 6 months of training is 11 to 12 hours a day. You're in classroom training, and then 2 to 3 hours a day of homework, right? That's based on having decent grades. If you're starting to fail out, they just put more hours on you that are mandatory. So you would have to do a mandatory, they gave you like 2 numbers. So like I was on 10-2s. So I was required to do 10 hours of extra work after class for the week. Those could be on weekdays or on weekends. But basically the second part of that, the 2 part of the 10-2 is how many hours you had to study on weekdays, period. So the 10 hours were covered in the weekday studies, but there was so much homework anyways that I was at school on Saturdays for 5 to 6 hours and then Sunday for about 2 to 3. But there were some people that went up to what we called ghost hours. So those are 35 fives. So basically 35 divided by 7, that's 5 hours a day, right? So they had to be at school for the extra 5 hours a day during the weekdays, and then on the weekends, an extra 5 hours a day on Saturday and Sunday. There wasn't a lot of like social time to get out. Yeah, I don't know. It was incredible. It was kind of, I don't know, sad to see those guys in the classroom for so long, but that's just how it worked. That's how the system works.
No, absolutely. And that must be also a big part of the, I don't want to say initiation process, and I don't want to use the wrong term because I'm relatively familiar, at least, with the way that they kind of initiate people in to any sector of the armed forces. Forget the Navy, but especially those sectors using, I mean, if you're going to be on a submarine every waking hour for a couple months at a time, at least with the same people, you know that they stress test you, right? Like, so.
They, you know, you can call it a stress test, I guess. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's just not only like the schooling preps you for what the actual stress of being in the nuclear field is going to be like, especially on a submarine. On a carrier, it's a lot different, a lot more leniency. You don't have to volunteer for it. So on carriers, they have an overabundance of nuclear engineers in the field. On submarines, they're always undermanned. So it's a lot more work on being part of the submarine.
Gotcha. Yeah.
But I want to go into so after the first year of schooling, the third 6 months of training is hands-on training, and that happens at nuclear reactors that are on land, and it's basically your first taste of how qualifications go in the nuclear field. You're given a list of probably like 200 signatures. When I say signatures, I mean 200 systems, to where you have to go talk to somebody one-on-one and tell them enough about the system to where they say, okay, you know the system, and they give you that signature. So you have 6 months to get those 200 signatures, and then you have a board at the end that kind of combines everything together and all your knowledge, and they say, hey, you're good to go. Like, you've learned how this one works, and then, you know, they send you to the fleet after that, where you basically do the same thing all over again because it's a different power plant. To give an example, all the nuclear theories and the stuff that we learned about in training was 1950s nuclear reactors, like the first ever built, right? So then the prototype is what we call the third 6 months of training, where it was hands-on. Those were about like 1960s, 1970s reactors, right? And you can see that some systems don't exist anymore. Some are automatic, some are a little bit different, but you know why they changed because you know where they started, right? It's just they got rid of the manual labor of these extra things that they found these automatic sensors to be able to do.
Gotcha. Yeah, exactly. And it's, first off, I think that's how education should go, but it's also, especially in the nuclear field where shit really isn't that old. I mean, it really is a lot, right? Like we're talking. They basically process nuclear fission or nuclear fusion. I can't remember which one they actually use. Fission. So yes. They come up with these methods, and then, you know, Chernobyl, and then the rest is history. Most of us don't know about this, which is why it's awesome that you're here.
Yeah, and the Navy, they can't afford the newest technology, so the nuclear reactors on ships today range from the 1980s to the 1990s. There's nothing that's super technological about any of them. Just kind of like, they're just kind of affordable. Yeah,
gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I love if there weren't like a trillion NDAs and things that you could actually, you know, explain about those things. Obviously moderate, you know, like moderate yourself and all. Yeah. But it's a fascinating field, and just for my own, because I'm a novice, and, you know, are these submarines actually running off nuclear power at all?
Yeah. All submarines and all carriers right now are only powered by nuclear power.
Okay. Yeah.
That's it. So that another thing going into nuclear field, those are your options when you go out to sea. Submarines or carriers, that's it. There's about 9 places that you can be stationed around the world, and that's it. That's all you get.
Yeah, gotcha. So if you don't mind taking us onto the submarine now, unless you have more to say on that, because I get it, man. But it's one of those things where some of the most interesting things. I actually have a cousin who's been working on submarines for about 16 years now, because he just stayed in the environment he got in, and he stayed in it. I never get to talk to him. I remember his first deployment. He's about 10 years older than I am. But it's one of those things where it's like, hey, mom, dad, I love you guys, but I'm not going to be home for Christmas for a few years. He's just like gone. He's just under the ocean. Can't say where he is. Can't say any of that. So,
yeah. Only one more thing I want to mention: the nuclear power plants that they use for training for prototype, they're actually all 4 of them. There's 4 of them that exist. 2 in South Carolina, 2 in New York. All 4 are either a full submarine or part of a submarine that was taken out of the water, put on land, covered in cement to have like a shield for radiation for the surrounding areas, which is, it's good enough to work. It works like seawater, right? Seawater is the shield. If fish get too close, then they see some radiation basically. But radiation disperses throughout the entire ocean, and we're just, a penny in one of the Great Lakes, basically, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So there's so much dilution that,
it doesn't affect us.
It doesn't really affect anything around us.
That brings up something else. Does it affect the sea life?
I mean, our pumps really affect the sea life more than radiation does. We have because we have cooling systems on the submarine, right, where that pull in seawater for our cooling systems, and every now and then we have these little, like, they're like grated, I guess, traps, you can say. But on the outside, we'll have to turn the water off and blow some air back out because we do catch like shrimp and little critters that get caught in those, right? That plug up the flow of seawater, basically, right? So when our temperatures are getting a little warmer, then the mechanics will have to do that.
Nice little side note.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sea Life, for your sacrifice. A little shreds, bro.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. Just give me your orientation going into, because I mean, there's a hell week for, I assume, every sector of the armed forces. What was that kind of like? Because you went through the education. What was the actual?
Yeah, there is no like real initiation, especially in the nuclear field. For new guys, there's you will get picked on 100% the moment you step on a submarine, but that's a good thing. That means people like you, right? You want to be liked enough to get picked on, or you want to be liked enough to get assigned to do something to someone that they don't like, right? And a lot of times that'll like come back to you in the form of signatures on your qual card, to help you get qualified for that submarine, or the nuclear power plant on that submarine, rather. So it was just, when you arrive in the nuclear field for any nuclear power plant, it takes at least 6 months to be qualified enough to stand your first watch, right? And it's going to be something super easy. It's going to be something that's kind of, they don't actually need you for that, but it's good to have somebody doing that. And the first watch is going to be your what we call auxiliary electrician aft, and it's a roving watch. The engine room's in the aft of the submarine. That's why it's auxiliary electrician aft, right? So you're just roving around the engine room, listening for abnormal noises from pumps, from generators, checking their temperatures just with your hand, right? Basically making sure it's not too hot. Just easy stuff like that, right? Mm-hmm. But we have enough sensors in the engine room. We have enough alarms to know if something is abnormal or not anyways. So you're kind of just there for, the warm and fuzzy feeling.
Yeah, I gotcha.
That something's not wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's also good in such a technical field. Going into your first, without disclosing, locations or anything that you're not comfortable with, even though it's probably all completely up in the air at this point. When was your first actual, I don't want to say mission, but deployment?
But deployment, yeah. So this one is kind of weird because let's go back to prototype now. At prototype, when I was there, there was maintenance going on with our main coolant pumps, which are the coolant pumps that make the coolant flow in a reactor to keep the core at a certain temperature, to make sure that there's no like I guess overpower. So basically, like the hotter it gets, then the more power a reactor could produce. Our nuclear reactors are designed in a way to where if it gets to a certain temperature, the hotter it goes, the less power it produces. But up until that point, it will produce more power than it should, right? Mm-hmm. But basically, they were doing maintenance on this system, and they inadvertently started one of the reactor coolant pumps, but the whole system that part of the system was tagged out. So there was no indication in what we call control, which is where you can see and operate these coolant pumps from. There was no indication that a second pump was running on that side. So it was a huge incident. It was like a major thing that blew up. And then also a week later, the other nuclear power plant, this is in New York now, in 2008. The other nuclear power plant in New York violated the BFPL. The BFPL is a brittle fracture pressure limit curve, and that tells us what temperatures and at what pressures we can keep the nuclear reactor at, right? That's based on brittle fracture of the metals that is holding it all together, right? So if that curve gets violated, it's it's maybe I shouldn't say very, but it is possible that there could be brittle fracture in that metal, which could cause leaks into systems that aren't supposed to have leaks in them, or just a crack in the shielding or something,
Some structural damage will happen.
So they violated that, and that was that's the biggest no-no that could ever possibly happen for the nuclear reactor. Because if it does cause that, it's very possible you can have a nuclear accident come from that, right? That's why that curve is created. So after that happened, they actually shut down prototype while I was there. I had 3 signatures left out of 200. I had about a week left, right? I called my buddy from my best friend from my hometown saying, hey, if you want to drive to New York, right? I'm getting stationed in San Diego. We can drive back together, right? He went to New York. He drove there. I think he flew there actually. But he spent the whole month waiting for me with my 3 signatures, and it was just one thing after another that kept delaying this month training hold to 2 months to 3 months to 4 months, 5 months, and eventually 6 months training hold, right? So I was at training for an extra 6 months that I didn't need to be. In a sense, it was just no signatures could be given during that time. We're all just kind of stuck there on shift work doing 8 hours a day, which was nice. It was a nice break. Generally, it was 12 to 14 hours that I would spend at prototype every day. And it was still shift work. So the days, the evenings, and then the overnights, right? It would just rotate through. That exact 6 months was the exact 6 months that the submarine I was stationed on went on deployment. So I actually missed out on my first deployment because I was stuck on this training hold. This was my first what we call a good deal in the Navy, and this was the best good deal that you could get.
Yeah, so but at the same time, that's kind of the question. Is like you get to avoid those extra few months of your 6-year contract, but 4 years at that point, right? Because you had already been through most of your training and all that.
Yeah.
Dude,
So-
I would be so like, just put me on a fucking submarine. Like, just get me the fuck out of here, because because of the nerves, Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, at that point, like, we were already in for a year and a half. At that point, I was in for 2 years already, right? So we knew what was coming up. We've heard all the stories, and at that point, like, not everybody's attitude is prideful to be back on a submarine. 90%, I want to say 90%. I could be completely off here though, but I want to say a majority of the people at Prototype, students and staff, did not want to go back to the submarine, right? Like that's what the attitude was. Like they know how shitty it is and what that life is like, and it's just much better being on land, seeing the sun every day, being able to spend money at a grocery store on food that you decide like what you want to eat, right? Like all that is just like incredible things, right? Looking out your window every day, like even that's amazing. Right?
So how long was the typical deployment as well? Just real quick.
Deployments were 6 months generally.
How often did you see sunlight during those 6 months?
A deployment, it works like this, right? You get a date that you're leaving. So my first deployment was, my first and only deployment that I actually made. We left in December of 2010, I believe, which sucks. It was like 17th, 18th, 19th December we were leaving for deployment, right? So that means we're missing Christmas. It means we're missing New Year's. And then whatever else comes along with that. I think it was just only those two as the major ones, because there's Easter was in there.
Happy Valentine's Day, honey.
Yeah, Valentine's Day was in there. Yeah. Yeah, so you missed some good holidays. So it kind of sucked. But basically, like, you go out, and we were given a month to get to our home base is what we call it, right? This deployment was a little bit different. I think most submarines that go on what's called a Westpac hang out near Japan, but they wanted us out in the Middle East. This was during the time of when Osama bin Laden was still alive, and Libya was being bombed in 2011. So they wanted us in the Middle East. So we said, all right. So we took about 2 weeks. We got to this little island called Saipan. It's one of the islands of Guam. We hung out there for 5 days. Get back on the submarine. We go to Bahrain was our home port for that deployment, and that took another 2 weeks. So you hang out 5 days in Bahrain, and then you get your first real orders, right? And then you're down underneath the water for 27 to 35 days, and then this is like not seeing sunlight, not surfacing, nothing, just being underwater, not running drills, nothing major is happening. You're just standing watch. You're going to sleep because you can't make any noise whatsoever. So 27, 35 days, and then we'll pull back into Bahrain for 5 days, right? You rinse and repeat that 3 times. We did get to go to Dubai at one point, and then on our trip back, we got to drop by Hong Kong. It was pretty awesome.
But not a whole lot of time with the sunlight. But at the same time, you are traveling the world, and that is a huge appeal for lots of my friends who went to the armed forces, granted, not on submarines.
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and there's what's interesting. We have this program in the Navy. It's called IA. I don't know exactly what it stands for, but guys can volunteer to go to the Middle East and like do missions on shore with I believe the Marines, right? The Navy and Marines are kind of connected, so they can volunteer to go hold guns and like do whatever those missions entail if they want to. And we had 2 guys that were on the submarine, and I was talking with them one time, right? Because especially when you're new, you talk to everybody, and those guys, both of them told me that it's better to go IA than it is to be on a submarine. Like, that's just to give you an idea, like, how crappy life is on a submarine, you know?
Psychic torture there.
Yeah, I mean, if you have, like, man, you had to load up on snacks. You had to load up on cigarettes and chewing tobacco. So smoking, actually, they did a secondhand research, and smoking was outlawed on submarines in 2011, January 2011. So a lot of the smokers, you just kind of left them alone for the first 2-3 weeks during that deployment, right? And
they would get over their
for the best. I was still, I was still qualifying a little bit, so I brought some, chewing tobacco that I could sell for $20 if I wasn't qualifying. But you hand it to them, you get a few signatures, pretty, easier than what it should normally take. And yeah, hot Cheetos were a hot commodity. Energy drinks were probably the most valuable thing on board. Monsters were huge on board. Yeah,
I just going back real quick because I have this experience in my own life. Not to relate to too much, but I mean, I feel like also it kind of ties into the pandemic, is that we've all kind of felt this thing where it's like, given the circumstance, not being able to see the light at the end of the tunnel necessarily, or a dim light far off, it makes it really difficult. And even if you have friends, you know, in the pandemic or in the woods or on a submarine or whatever, you still feel isolated. You know, I don't know if you guys experience that, which makes it really hard. It's like, you know, I could be with you, Aaron. It's like we get along just fine. It's like we're buddies. It's like it doesn't matter because we can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, so it doesn't matter that I have you. It's like I still feel lonely. Like,
yeah, absolutely, 100%. And I don't want to touch on anything like emotional or life affecting yet, but I definitely want to bring that up later on.
It's life on a submarine.
In the podcast.
This is my point.
Absolutely.
So we're just talking about life on a submarine.
Yeah. But you create from that isolation, right? All you have is the guys that you stand watch with and the other guys on the submarine. And a third of them you'll never see. Because the way submarine works, it works in 18-hour days. There's 3 crews, right? You need people to be up 24/7 to make sure the submarine doesn't sink and kill everyone, right? So you split the crew into 3. It's about 130 people on board that are part of the crew. And you have basically a shift, and it works in 8-hour or 18-hour days. So 6 hours you're sleeping, 6 hours you're on watch, and then 6 hours you either have free time or you're doing maintenance. But on deployment, there was no maintenance generally. You know, if you had to fix something, you definitely, you know, then we worked on fixing it. But yeah, generally you were just, they called, your bed, the hot rack time machine. We call racks beds in the submarine. And, you know, that's what people said. I'm going to the hot rack time machine. So
lots of oversleeping on the submarine.
What's that?
Lots of oversleeping on the submarine.
Oh, yeah. And it's easy to sleep on a submarine because the oxygen levels, atmospheric oxygen levels are kept between, well, they're not kept. The Earth makes it between 19 to 21%, maybe 22% some days, right? The oxygen levels on a submarine are kept between 17 and 19%. So 2% lower generally than atmospheric oxygen levels. And this is mainly due to help prevent fires from happening. Because if there was a major fire on board a submarine, let's split the submarine into 2. And physically, it is split into 2. The only watertight door on a submarine is in the middle of the submarine. So if you lose the back half of the submarine, they can shut that door. The front half will still survive. However, you only have the life support systems in the front half. There's no real power generation there. So you can't even work them. The back half of the submarine is all of the engine room stuff. So you do have power generation, but you have no life support stuff. So you're still going to, it doesn't matter which side you lose. Like, you have a limited amount of time before everybody's dead. No,
dude, honestly, absolutely. And we had a conversation. Right. Do you remember what you're going to say?
Yeah, so basically, when there is a fire, right, we keep that door shut at all times while we're underway. And when you go through it, you open it and then reshut it again. So if there is a fire, a major fire in a generator or a pump or one of the machines, it takes 1 minute to fully engulf one of the sides of the submarine in smoke. It's where it's not visible anymore, and you're having to fight the fire in that, which is actually very possible to do.
No, absolutely. And given the, I mean, the fact that there's safety precautions, the fact that it's easier to sleep, I just wanted to go ahead and touch on one thing, which is why I raised my mic, which is why I messed up Aaron, everyone. But it was one of those things because you were just reminding me, because I mean, this is literally a trigger to a past conversation that we had, a short one, with just like water supply and how limited things are on the actual submarine. It's like, just the daily routines that we take for granted. It's like only having limited amounts of water because you have to filter out salt water, right?
Yeah, we do. We have they're reverse osmosis machines basically. And I'm not exactly, I don't remember the numbers of how many gallons they produce, but like we had 2 what we called potable water tanks that held about 1,700 to 2,000 gallons, I think. I could be way off. I'm not a mechanic, but they were like part of what I had to know at one point, right? Anyways, it's thousands of gallons of water, right? So there's a lot of things that come into play, right? When you take showers, right? They say a submarine shower is like your first day getting on submarine. You talk with the captain. He's like, welcome aboard, whatever. Like, have you guys heard of submarine showers? We're like, no, right? They're 5-minute showers. You turn the water on, you get wet, you turn it off, you soap up yourself, right? And get your shampoo in, whatever else. Turn the water back on, rinse it off, right? And then turn the water off, get out and dry out. It should take less than 5 minutes, right? And this is you conserving water. This was important especially for a new guy, right? Because it's how, if someone saw you taking a longer shower than that, especially as a new guy, then that was definitely grounds to get yelled at for sure. But as you were there longer and longer and you gained rank, eventually you just stopped caring. Like my showers were always like 5 to 10 minutes. So the water was always on. Like it was nice. But you were very aware of how much water you were using because it was limited on the submarine. You could only produce so much at a time.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, so we were talking about air systems, or we were talking about essentially the amount of air that they actually allow for the submarine to, I don't know, but controlling the atmosphere on the submarine. So if we can just go back to the air system there.
Yeah, right. And you might ask, oh, well, how do they know how much of carbon monoxide is in the air, how much oxygen, how much whatever is in the air, right? That system, we had this machine that works like have you ever seen like Bozo the Clown when you were younger and they had the game where the kids tossed the ping pong balls in the buckets and every bucket was like a little further than the next one that they had to make?
Hell no.
No? So basically this machine spits out air like a cannon. It just sucks in the air from the submarine like a cannon, and there's a bunch of these tubes lined up in a series, and basically the heavier the molecule was, the shorter distance it would go. So then it would go down a tube, and then when that tube sensed the molecule coming in, right? Well, it sensed all of them collectively and gave you a percentage of how much was coming down this tube, how much coming down this tube, how much coming down this tube, right? And those molecules, one was oxygen, one was carbon monoxide, right? Just one was carbon dioxide. Just these like 8 or 9 different air molecules that it calculated. So from there, we got our percentage of how much oxygen was on the submarine, right? So that let us know, hey, we need to run the oxygen generator if the oxygen's low, or if we were on deployment, we have oxygen candles that we burned at 400 degrees, right? And they're literally candles that we set on fire, and at 400 degrees they made oxygen. It's kind of weird, but it's interesting. And that's how that system worked. But there was also a part of the back to firefighting and the air system on board. If there was a fire, major fire that engulfed one of the sides fully in smoke to where you couldn't see, we had these things called EABs, and they were these basically these face masks that you put on, and they had tubes with like a check valve on the end with a little spout that you could plug into another like female spout basically. And we had the air system had about every 10 feet was like a hookup station basically that had 4 female spouts, so 4 people could be hooked onto that at any one time. So if we needed to fight the fire without being able to see, it was extremely possible for us to do that because we had our air supply every 10 feet. We just had to unhook, plug the top to make sure no smoke got in between that area and the check valve, and then plug it back into the next air supply connection 10 feet down the hallway, basically, right? It's pretty insane, the capability of that. But also, everybody's EAB had this connection on their waist as well. So if there were more than 4 people at a station, you hand your plug over to the guy next to you, and he'll plug it into his little hip connection, right? So you can have 10 guys all linked together, all getting air from the same spot. Like it's pretty, I don't know, it's pretty wild if you think about it.
Of course. Yeah. There's a system there, and obviously talking about the training here and the fire training, and once you guys get on board, what you guys are doing there.
Yeah. So we ran drills every week, right? This is how like we kind of tune ourselves, getting well equipped to fighting fires or fighting flooding or fighting whatever casualty there is. There's a lot with that. So there's about 20 to 30 casualty procedures for every single nuclear reactor power plant in existence. Those casualty procedures have something called immediate actions. They range from probably 5 to 20 actions, but those immediate actions are what's required for everybody on board to memorize. Not on board, everybody in the nuclear field to memorize. So we know what our jobs are while we're on watch, and we know what other people's jobs are while they're on watch with us, right? So if they forget, then we can remind them, hey, do this, do this, do this. Especially with the newer guys, it wasn't like us remembering, it was really them saying, hey, do this, right? There was a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge there. But going back to fires, right, there were really no immediate actions. There's basically a fire crew that gets dressed up in firefighting outfits. We had the whole suits stowed away in certain areas, so you had to grab those. You had, we call them Host Team Oscar. That's what we call those guys, right? The first thing is going back to the first thing, the watch stander that notices it, which I have noticed a fire myself, and we'll get into that later. We'll grab a fire extinguisher and immediately just go to the fire and try putting out the fire with the fire extinguisher, right? If that exhausts, there's generally a second watchstander who's found another fire extinguisher to help with that as well. Once that exhausts, at that point, you have a few other watchstanders. Once the fire gets called away, you have the two watchstanders right there. You have more watchstanders that grab and what's called fake out the hose. Basically, the hose is wound up in a circle, right? You get it. You make sure you stretch it across the hallway so there's no kinks when you actually activate the water to that hose, right? Meanwhile, Host Team Oscar is getting ready in what we call the cruise mess, right? They have the whole front half of the submarine, the whole third crew of people not doing anything because they're sleeping, right? They wake up, right? You wake up, you go to cruise mess.
There's a fire.
Yeah, there's a fire. Everybody knows it, right? Everybody's in boxers, whatever. You help Host Team Oscar get dressed out in their firefighting suits. We have 30-minute oxygen tanks that they carry, just like you see on TV with real firefighters. We have that on board the submarine, and we have the hoses connected to certain points, and we know where the hoses are, right? That's also part of your knowledge that you're supposed to have on board. Once the watchstanders are done, right, they've extinguished their fire extinguishers. By that time, Host Team Oscar should be there with the hose if it is a major fire like that. Everybody else will be grabbing their EABs and putting them on. Even the watchstanders in what we call maneuvering, which is where you have the 3 panels for the nuclear power plant, and you have control, right? In control, like nobody can move in control. There's the sonar techs up there watching what we're seeing in the water. There's the guys controlling the submarine up and down and left and right. There's the captain back there. Everybody on board has a very specific EAB that they have to put on, right? And the people not fighting the fire still have to drive the submarine. So that's what they're doing, right? So we have ways of them to connect to the air systems where they're at and deal with it that way. They just got to hope for the best, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So just a side question, and you answered most of it, but you guys have a special troop, like special troops for actually fighting the fire. So no, Host Team Oscar.
No. Nobody is a special troop. You get assigned every underway. You get assigned on who is on Host Team Oscar. Generally, it's rotating, right? On carriers, you have a whole fire crew designated to fighting fires. You don't have to know how to do anything. On submarines, every person on board has to know how to do everything, right? So we're trained firefighters. We're trained to fight flooding ourselves, right? It doesn't matter who's doing it. Everybody has the knowledge to do it and will stand up when it becomes their time to do it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. And so the drill is actually to go ahead and fight these fires.
Yeah, we run. Let's save that for later. Let's go back to the trainers though, because it's not like we only run drills on board the submarine, and that's the only that's the only thing that we learn is on the submarine. No, there's when we're on shore connected to the pier, right? You have some time off. You still have Monday through Friday work days, right? But every now and then you get assigned to be at a trainer, right? A fire trainer, a flooding trainer. Maybe it's even like courses for we had a new battery installed when I first got there, so we're learning the battery system basically, which is like classroom training for like 3 days or something like that. But we have these buildings on base that are the fire trainer and then the flooding trainer. The fire training is just a mock-up engine room of it's just a mock. It's a room that's a mock-up of an engine room basically, and it's not even close to what's actually on board a submarine. I don't know why they use it, but that's just what they use. But they have every type of fire that could happen, right? They have the bilge fires, which releases, there's a certain extinguisher that we use to put out bilge fires because it's all oil or water or some kind of liquid burning, right? There's a way to put that out. Electrical fires, there's a way to put that out with this powder stuff, right? And then normal fires, CO2, right? Anything that's combustible. The fire trainer itself, though, is incredible. You start with, you go there and, they'd say, hey, we're going to start the fire. This guy's going to be on watch. Everybody's like, all right, cool. So we just stand by. There's a mock-up watertight door, right, as if we're not in the engine room. And then the watchstander calls away a fire, right? He grabs the fire extinguisher, he grabs the EAB, he plugs in, he starts fighting the fire, right? That gives the rest of the 12 of us who are in that trainer the time to get decked out in the firefighting gear with our 30-minute oxygen tanks, and then go in there. By the time we get in there, they've already lit the fire, like the whole wall on fire, which is about 40 feet of wall. So smoke is filling up the room really quickly. There are instructors in there that have control of it, so they can put it out whenever they want, which actually happened once. It was amazing. Well, it wasn't amazing. It was pretty intense. Basically, the bilge fire, I've done that training twice. The bilge fire one time, the guy put it out, and the trainers had left the gas lines on. So that fire was out. The gas was still going. The 40-foot wall is on fire. There's 12 of us in there now. There's 3 of us on top of that grate where the bilge fire was. And then all of a sudden, there's a large cloud of fire just engulfing 2 of our guys. Like, it was insane. It was madness. I was like, oh my God, because they were right in front of me. It was crazy. And then, they turned on the lights to the trainer, and they put out all the fires. They said, everybody out. I was like, holy crap. Wow. My buddy, who was one of the ones who got engulfed in the fire, he was bald, right? He takes off his helmet and his fireproof, mask, whatever, and his bald head was steaming still from that. It was insane. It was crazy. But yeah, so we go there maybe once a year. They train us in that fire trainer. Generally, everything goes smoothly. We're aiming the hose at the wall, going in a figure 8, like they tell us, aiming at the base of the fire. That's basically it. It's pretty simple, pretty easy stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly. And where you lost me, but the fascinating thing is, on a submarine, you guys are all trained in actual firefighting.
Yeah, because, a third of the crew is asleep at all times, so you can't depend on them to fight a fire, especially if they're not the ones back there. Everybody has to know their part. Everybody does their job. Everybody fights together to keep the crew alive. It's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. The other question that I had for you, was actually, given the fact that there are fires on these submarines, and I assume there's a gas line and an infrastructure around the submarine, where do these fires actually normally start? Just so I have context on that, because I assume they place the most volatile areas away from the living quarters, so to speak.
Yes, most of them. There's a few areas where they can start. They're generally around the generators, anything having to do with oil or possibly the hydraulic systems. I don't know at what temperature it takes for the hydraulic fluids to create fire, but it's definitely possible. The other thing, though, you can have electrical, like arcing and sparking in breakers and stuff like that, right? And then that could melt metals together. Generally, it's only metals, so generally you should only see metal melting and not a large fire because there's no combustibles in the area. I've never, seen that. But the one fire I did see was from one of our main generators. We call it the turbine generator. It has oil in the system. So that oil was just leaking on a spot that was 300 degrees or so. So when I caught that fire, I saw the white smoke because I was like, 6 months in, my first roving watch, right? Checking temperatures, listening to noises, right? I come across this fire and it wasn't really a fire. It was just white smoke. And I turned to the guy, the main watchstander in the engine room. What is it? I believe it's engine room roving watch. I'm probably completely wrong. It might be... I'm not even going to attempt it. My memory has failed me. However, there's another senior watchstander that roves the engine room as well. He's a mechanic, right? So I'm like, hey, there's smoke coming over here. He's like, oh, go call it away, And I'm like, I have no idea what to say, right? Even though we're trained in this, but I've run like 3 drills so far, and I've never announced one. So then, he goes to what we call the 4MC, which is our emergency line. Which goes to the front of the boat and to the captain's stateroom, just a few rooms, right, where the main watchstanders have what we call the 1MC, which is the intercom throughout the entire boat that every single person hears, right? So we call away a 4MC, right, calls away white smoke on the port turbine generator. Everybody knows their actions. The electrical watchstander shuts down that generator to get rid of the power, right? If you can get rid of electricity, something, most likely you're going to put out the fire just by doing that. And then I find my fire extinguisher. I'm waiting there, right? Because I don't see fire yet, so I don't want to exhaust the fire extinguisher because it won't do any good if there's no fire.
Are most of these fires started by arc flashes? It sounds like certain ones are literally just pure energy running through metal, heating up, and then a volatile substance like oil
right?
dropping.
I don't know if I can even answer that question because that was the only fire I've ever seen on a submarine.
I'm literally only asking because I used to work on ski lifts, and it was always an arc flash that lit the whole fucking thing on fire, and you start turning on auxiliary engines and trying to So
generally, generally there's nothing combustible. There's nothing that can continue. Maintaining a fire itself. Generally it's going to be arc flashes or something that's short-circuited that goes through somewhere to produce smoke and heat and whatever, but nothing is really combustible on a submarine.
10-4, homie.
Yeah.
He's got it.
But let's go back to so the trainers as well. So not only were there fire trainers, there was a flooding trainer, which is pretty insane. Another mock-up of an engine room that looks nothing like our engine rooms. I don't know why they do it that way, but they do. But this trainer was incredible. So you start in this building. There's, again, 12 of you or so, and they call the watchstander down, right? One of you volunteers to be a watchstander, or they told you to be one, right? So you go down there, and you climb down two floors of ladders, right? 10-foot ladders. You go down, and then you have access to the piping down there, the pumps. It's all metal grating that you're working on, or walking on rather. So it's just the, metal grates, right?
Totally.
So basically, it's not like a floor to where you're protected from anything that comes up above that, like water, right? If it floods too much. So they have the watchstander down there, and then when he's ready, they give the signal. And these pipes have holes in them purposely, right? It's a trainer. So they activate one of the pumps, right? They actually pulled that water from the ocean in San Diego. That trainer's close enough to have pipes running from the ocean to that building. So they actually pull in ocean water, and it's pretty cold.
So I just have my own, ignorant little question is, typically when you guys are fighting fires, are you guys using salt water or fresh water that you guys actually pulled and hold and you pool on the submarine, or is there actually a difference there? I don't know if you actually know the answer to this question. It's just something that I was thinking about.
I believe I don't remember anymore, but if I had to guess, I believe we use our own potable water because seawater on especially electronics or on pipes will make it rust.
I would think so.
Right?
Yeah, because the sodium would immediately be exposed to any.
So I'm going to go with potable water on that one.
Gotcha.
90% sure on that answer.
So at least they thought it through, and at least, well, if they are and you are, so yeah, exactly, man. And the flood trainer, just to be clear, so the flood trainer, just give me the axioms, give me the premise for the flood trainer, just so I understand.
Right. So
Fully.
So we have to go through like flooding training basically, because we have things that have tools and material in it to wrap around a pipe, but if you don't know what you're doing, then it won't help at all. We call those things bandit kits. The trainer, we have like probably like an hour or two of classroom training, maybe even longer than that. I'm not even sure anymore, where they teach you like how to use these things effectively, how they're supposed to be used, what it's supposed to look like, what all the tools are for, whatever, right? And then the last day of that training, you go into this flooding trainer. That doesn't make any sense at all.
That's why I'm asking.
Whatever. Again, memory's failing. I don't know. It's a few days or a few hours. Anyways. So you're in this trainer, right? And then you know where the bandit kits are. They go over where everything's at, right? They go over the battle lanterns. Battle lanterns are just giant DC battery lanterns because you expect the lights to go out. And that's exactly what happens, right? They turn the water on, there's flooding. 5 seconds later, it goes dark in that room. And it's a big room. So the 12 of us that are standing by to go help are running across the hall and then going down those 2 flights of ladders. And by that time, they've already activated 3 other holes in the other systems. And they've even put like really, really hard holes in there that nobody's ever been able to fully close up. So they just want to see where our minds are at, how well we can actually combat that sort of flooding, and whatever else. And it's amazing because you're working with someone down there with one of those DC battery lights, once you find one at least, and you're getting hit with 30 something degree water from the ocean. Like it really like puts things into like perspective. And then if you look down below you, the water level's rising, right? They don't deflood the area while you're in there. They just let it rise and rise and rise. So if you guys suck, like you'll be covered up to your knees, basically.
You'd be dead real quick, especially at that many atmospheres of pressure underneath the ocean, which is the fascinating thing. So you say, freezing. I mean, 30 degrees, ice cold water filling your boat. Have you ever had a flooding experience?
No, but I stood one of the most dangerous watches during diving. So one of the most dangerous things that you can do on a submarine is go beneath the ocean, or go beneath the surface of the ocean.
Yeah.
Even though you're meant to be down there, the moment you initiate doing that, that's the most dangerous moment that you can have on a submarine. So I stood in the very back, what we called shaft alley. And shaft alley, there's a system called the shaft seals. And these shaft seals were in place to prevent water from coming in the submarine, because the propeller is just one giant piece of metal that spins, right? On one end of that metal is the turbines, these fan blades basically being hit by steam that's pressurized to make it spin in a certain direction, right? Those fan blades are connected to a shaft that runs, 60, 70 feet all the way out the back of the submarine. So between the ocean water and the submarine, there's something called the shaft seals. So that was the most important spot to watch while you're diving. That was my spot to watch while we were diving. That's the most likely spot for flooding to happen when we did dive.
Do you guys dive directly off of the submarine?
What do you mean?
So I have this like futuristic image right now, based on just my, kind of my own imagination, but based off what you're saying, of having, 2 hatches.
Yes.
In basically a chamber, an out chamber, an in chamber, where you can actually dive straight out of the submarine. Obviously, you wouldn't do it at enormous depths.
In case of an emergency.
But if you're at, let's just say 50 feet.
Yes.
You know what I mean? You can actually go out and dive off of the submarine. presuming you don't get hit by that fat fin in the back. Hopefully, let's
Yeah.
pray.
So
That's what I'm asking though.
yeah, that's another system. The way that works, we practice that. I think that's a once a year requirement, maybe once every 2 year requirement. But there's something called a SEIE suit, SEIE, and they're just suits that have bubbles of air that aren't fully inflated yet. So what you do when we dive, we flood those hatches, right? There's a top hatch basically, which is the top door, right, which is your first entrance to a submarine. You climb down a ladder about 8 feet, and then there's a second door there that's also watertight. So you open that one up, and that's how you get to the submarine. Basically, they're always open when we're on the surface. Well, not always, but when we're in port, right, docked up, they're always open, so there's easy access everywhere. When you're underway, both of those are shut, right? There's one hatch up forward, there's one hatch in the middle of the submarine, basically. And there's one back aft, actually, as well. 1, 2... Yeah, so there's 3 hatches, actually. We only keep 2 of them open in port, though. So basically, when we dive, we flood those with water to get rid of our buoyancy as well, right? And then on the outside of the submarine are these tanks of air that some we keep with air and some we flood with water when we want to dive as well. But we do have this training with the SEIE suits where basically we deflood the middle hatches of those hatches. We open the bottom door. 2 people can climb in with these SEIE suits on. They shut the bottom door. They have these basically these air hoses in there. They have a hose connected to the suit themselves around the waist. They connect that hose to the connection inside of that hatch, and it actually fills all the pockets in their suit with air. Right, and then they grab a hammer. There's a hammer that's like metallically connected, not metallically, but it has like a little metal cord that connects it to the hatch to where it can never be removed from that hatch. You bang on the bottom hatch 2 or 3 times, like there's signals there to like help me, or something's not right, or hey, we're ready to go. That's basically all your options. Your only 2 options, really.
I'm here. I'm up on top. Please let me in.
Yeah, like everything's okay. We're good to go, right? I'm full of air. Bing, bing, bing.
There's a crazy video I'll show you at some point, or maybe I'll go ahead if we ever decide to release this and go ahead and just post it as a video portion to it.
Yeah,
and it's the coolest thing ever. It's like it was somewhere in like near South America. I think it was closer to Patagonia or somewhere, because it was like definitely frozen ice wandering around. And it's it's like Navy SEALs coming up, and they hop on another submarine that's transporting drugs. And then they go, wah, 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 wah. Thing opens, dude opens it, and they go and they rip the dude out, and they infiltrate. Wow. It's a crazy video though, dude. It's absolutely phenomenal. Just to go back to it, because we've talked about fire training, flooding training, so just drills that we're running on the submarine. We've covered quite a bit there, but if you have anything else to say about it.
But to complete this thought on the SEIE suit thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you bang it, right, and then that gives them the notice that they basically flood the hatch while you and your partner open the top hatch at the same time, right? It has to be sort of all at once. And then you don't have to know how to swim. You don't have to know how to do anything. There is an air pocket around your face as well, but it is open to atmosphere. So that air that is there will eventually disappear. But it's supposed to be enough to where you can breathe on your way up to the surface, and your SEIE suit has all the air pockets in it already full of air. So that's what's supposed to be your buoyancy and getting you up to the surface of the ocean. The issue with that, right, they tested this because everything on a submarine has to be tested and approved by the government. They tested this with 2 Navy SEALs at 600 feet. This system worked for them because they were so in shape. Just to give you an idea, every 100 feet is 44 pounds of pressure on the submarine, right? 600 feet, what is that, 280, 300 pounds of pressure on your body? Like, that's a lot of pressure on a human being. And those two SEALs were in shape enough to where they survived at 600 feet, right? The other thing you're worried about is with divers, right? They go up slowly as they come up because of the whole blood thing. I don't know. I'm not a diver.
I've heard this though. Yeah, you'll get air bubbles in your blood, plus the pressure, plus you have to acclimate the whole way up. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, basically on a submarine, there's no option to prevent that. That's just what you're gonna have to deal with. But at 600 feet, these two Navy SEALs tested that system. They tested the suits. They survived it. They were hospitalized. I don't know for how long afterwards, but they survived it. So because of them surviving, this system was implemented on submarines. Granted, you can release 2 people on a sinking submarine every 3-4 minutes or so. So not everybody's going to get out alive. But it is a way for us to combat everyone dying. You know, at least there would be someone to tell the story.
No, absolutely. So I had one more question. Just right here is because we don't actually cover this often. I've never heard this before. I've heard a lot of things, but how does buoyancy and what is the actual mechanism for affecting buoyancy in a submarine? Because in our minds, right, in the average civilian's mind, like what I think is like, the submarine wants to go from 200 feet to 400 feet. It goes. You know what I mean? Like, which you know, I think we're all smarter than that, but we just don't think about it, right? So
yeah, no, we basically open some valves. It lets water into, like I said before, there's air tanks on the outside of the submarine. In between the human space and the outside hull of the submarine, there's air tanks there. I don't know how many, but some of those get filled with water when we want to dive to get rid of the amount of air that's on a submarine. And then once we get rid of enough, we'll start going underneath, right? We have the propulsion behind us, right, just moving through the water, which is enough to take us down under the water. And then the air tanks that we still have with air on them, those are used for emergency only. So we have something called chicken switches. So when we get to a certain depth where we can't recover in time, if we go below this depth, everybody dies. There's a certain depth at which the captain will say, pull the chicken switches. Well, he won't say that, but he'll say something similar, and then everybody knows what they're talking about. So basically,
10-4, boy.
Yeah. So basically, the guy pulling them has to pull the front ones first. So he pulls the front ones. It's pressurized air in these, so it opens up these valves in the front of the submarine, and the air pressure shoots downward, lifting the submarine up. And then after the submarine's at a nice tilt, I guess we'll say, shooting up to the surface, he'll pull the back ones. So then it works like just an airplane taking off, basically, where the submarine is being propelled by the air pressure that it's spouting out of its bottom, basically, to get back up to the surface. Now, this you've seen in movies a lot, where it shows the submarine come, like, barreling out of the water, and then it, like, goes back down into the water, right? That's what they're doing. They're practicing this. But when we practice it, we don't actually pull those switches. We just move the propeller at a high speed.
which is exactly what I'm asking. And the fact is, like, that's the way that most of us actually assume that submarines work, is that there's some mechanic function through propellers, through all that actually is able to drive the submarine down. I mean, like, okay, so
yeah, it works exactly like an airplane does.
I was about to say
exactly.
We know a lot about airplanes. Well, like some people don't, but really, you can teach anyone about an airplane. It's like the amount of air pressure going underneath the wings, the fins, the way that you guide the air at a certain speed. There's more, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's really my question, but that is also super interesting to hear. Like at the end of the day, like the simplest solution for surfacing at a high speed or whatever is your chicken switch.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's
releasing
the
air down and air pressure in water, buoyancy, and
yeah. And even then, right? Let's say, so I'm allowed to say the submarine can reach depths greater than 800 feet. So basically, our last ditch effort, right? Once we get to at least below 800 feet, is to pull those switches to give us time to get the reactor going, to fix whatever's causing us to sink. 99% of the time, it's going to be that the reactor is shut down, and there's some other issue with it that you can't get power to it or something that needs to be fixed, right? I've never seen this before, so I don't know what causes this to happen. But basically, you lose control, you're sinking, you get down to that depth, you pull those chicken switches. Once you go back up, you go up to the surface, you immediately drop back down to 200 feet because of the weight of the submarine. It does not keep you at the surface. It will not keep you at the surface. But it'll buy you
Hello,
another
my name is Jesse
5
Dyer, and
minutes
welcome
of
to
time
the
before you get back to that
website.
depth.
Hello,
but this
hello,
time
hello.
you're out of air to save everyone. So, you know,
Yeah,
it just buys you about 5 minutes.
absolutely. And the fact that these submarines for like can actually take that amount of pressure in the first place is something that we should get into at some point.
So, but I just want to go ahead and talk a little bit about the actual experience of having a submarine flood on you, what it was like, and actually what went ahead and caused that.
Yeah. It wasn't actually flooding, but it was part of the drills that we ran, right? We ran fire drills sometimes. Sometimes it was flooding. Sometimes it was, loss of a turbine generator, loss of some type of cooling water, steam line rupture, stuff like that, reactor scram, right? So this one time we were running flooding. And the way we train people, right? We before they can stand their watch, they have to do a set of drills to prove to us that they know what they're doing. So when they do that, they have what's called an over-instruct, which is a guy who's actually experienced and qualified to stand that watch. And then the new guy is the one making the shots underneath them. And the over-instruct is just there to sort of make sure he doesn't mess everything up too badly and get everybody killed. So during this flooding drill, the new guy was confused and he gave out a few of the wrong orders, and the crew knows, like, we all know the actions. So we just kind of like let him go along with what he was doing. And the over-instruct, we expected the over-instruct to correct him himself. But that never really happened. But it got to a point. So in flooding drills, let's start there. In flooding drills, we do act like it's actually happening, and we cut off either power to ourselves, our propulsion, whatever it may be that the casualty calls for. We actually do these actions to put us in somewhat danger. So in flooding, we cut off propulsion completely. So we have about 5 minutes before the submarine actually starts sinking to get everything back up and running. And generally, we can do it within 5 minutes. It's like a normal thing that everybody knows. We know it's coming. We know how to get ourselves out of it, basically. But this guy, this over-instruct just let him give out the wrong orders and be confused for so long that we were at 200 feet and the submarine actually started dropping, right? And at that moment I knew, like, we were actually sinking. It was pretty intense. And a submarine, it doesn't like tilt downwards and sink like you're on a slide, right, at the carnival. No, it stays level, and it actually drops down like 3 to 4 feet every 5 to 10 seconds. And every time it did that, like, I felt it 3 to 4 times. You feel it drop, and you get that feeling in your stomach, as if like you're on, like when you're on a roller coaster, or like one of the ones that drop straight down, right? That feeling, like, you get that feeling. Like, that moment was definitely probably the second scariest moment that I've had on a submarine. Like, it's pretty intense. It's pretty amazing when you can feel yourself sinking on a submarine when you're not supposed to sink. It's crazy.
And you're headed towards the abyss too.
Yeah, you're like, oh damn, like, what's happening? But I was on watch at that time. I was the one who was actually getting propulsion back to us, so I was not as scared as probably some of my other shipmates who were not in charge of the propulsion system. But I knew exactly where we were, what to do to get propulsion back to us, and what the next steps were. So it didn't really bother me too much, but it was still extremely scary just feeling those drops every few seconds. It was incredible.
Exactly. And it was like being kind of more familiar with not just the propulsion system and the actual physics that go along with that. I had a question about, using your weapon system and how the weapons themselves actually interact with the pressure, because thinking about it logically is a lot of the weapons that you guys would have been using probably are more familiar with, 0 to 1 atmospheres of pressure, not 5.
Yeah. So basically, like I think the difference there is just that what the material that these are made of are supposed to withstand these pressures when they experience them. And generally, when we launch torpedoes or we launch missiles, like it's not at a great depth. It's maybe 200 feet below the surface, maybe 400. Generally, so a basic insight about sound itself, sound travels down naturally. So in order for us to have an advantage over another submarine or whatever we're shooting at, we have to be above it. That gives us the advantage. But the system itself, the way it works, right? Like torpedoes are on deployment. Torpedoes are loaded into torpedo tubes, and we have Tomahawk missiles as well. They're 12 missile tubes that are vertical on the front of our submarine. And those Tomahawk missiles are sea-to-land missiles. The Tomahawks, when we are told to launch them, we can launch them underwater even. They have pockets of, I believe, nitrogen in their caps. So when we do launch them from under the water, yes, they do feel the pressure of the water, but at the same time, the caps are releasing nitrogen, and it's in a blanketed fashion to where those missiles never actually touch or feel the water themselves. There's enough nitrogen there to separate it from the water, which is pretty interesting.
They almost have their own atmosphere at that point.
Yeah, they do.
That's super fascinating, dude. I love this ballistic shit. I really do, because it's super fascinating. Which is actually one more thing, just like honestly. So ballistic systems within the ocean versus those outside, because I imagine that even if they don't use them as much now because of the total control that I imagine allied nations have actually over the ocean. You know what I mean? I'm not saying that they have total control, but I imagine sea warfare is much less common than actual land warfare at this point.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that goes all the way back to the 1980s, 1970s. Mm-hmm. There were secrets sold to Russia by some guy. Those secrets were actually submarine silencing secrets. So Russia got a hold of the American silencing technology, was basically just a bunch of rubber. And Russia paid China to build their submarines for them. So now China has that same sound silencing technology. So if every nation had the same submarines, which they kind of almost do already, like it's extremely hard to see another submarine from a submarine. Like everything's dead, everything's silent, right? The only time you can see a submarine is when you're traveling at a high speed because your propeller makes a lot of noise in the water, or when you're on a older style submarine. That would be like a diesel submarine. Nuclear submarines can stay underwater for as long as they want because they have nuclear power. Diesel submarines don't have that nuclear power plant there. Instead, they have a bunch of diesel generators and they have a very large battery. So basically, they can stay underwater as long as their battery lasts, which is, I want to say, around 3 to 4 hours. Maybe longer. I don't know. I've never been on one. I've never researched one. I don't know. However, when that battery starts dying, it's basically a giant rechargeable battery, right? So when that battery starts dying, they have to rise up to the surface to where they can run their diesels. Why do they have to rise to the surface to run their diesels? Because the diesels have exhaust fumes. And the exhaust fumes cannot overpower the amount of pressure that the ocean gives them back. So if they open those exhaust pipes 100 feet below the surface of the ocean, they would have water incoming into their generators, and that would just kill them immediately. They'd run out of battery power, and they'd destroy their diesels.
Yeah, exactly. So the water can't overpower the diesel exhaust, essentially.
Correct.
The pressure coming out of that. Gotcha.
Yes, and we did have a diesel on board our submarine as well, right? When we ran it, we were generally like around 50 feet. Then that's enough for the diesel fumes to get to the surface and out that way.
And that would be your auxiliary power. So essentially, your support.
Yeah, our support, because our batteries are smaller on a nuclear submarine because we don't need the battery power to propel us forward, to run our propeller, right? So our battery power was only there when we experienced reactor scrams, basically, or which is a quick shutdown of the reactor, which we do have a procedure to combat that. And we can restart a reactor from it shutting down within 10-15 minutes, right? Our battery on the nuclear submarine only provides with 30 minutes of power. So if we wanted to supplement that, if we knew other things needed to be powered at that time, let's say the oxygen generators had to be running because we were running low on oxygen, right? We would start up our diesel generator to help us supplement our battery to give us more time to recover the nuclear power plant. But basically you had 30 minutes of when a reactor shut down to get the reactor up and running again before everybody sinks, basically.
Gotcha. Yeah, we went a little bit off tangent, and it was my fault because I honestly, these are things that I have,
yeah, everything connects.
But everything connects, and like honestly, these are super interesting facets of what we've been going over. But let's go ahead and get back to the ballistic systems,
the missile systems, yes.
Because what I'm super interested in is honestly trying to figure out like how
they work.
I asked you about underwater ballistic systems versus ballistic systems that actually launch into the atmosphere and how the atmospheric pressure underneath the ocean affects that.
Yeah.
So I just want to go a little bit into actual airborne ballistics. You know what I mean? So if we're going to go ahead and launch a missile,
yes.
right? Because there's several kinds. Yeah, I don't mean to confuse you, but...
Yeah. So we would basically get in order if we were launching, let's say like a sea to land missile, one of our Tomahawks, right? So they would give us a order. They would give the captain an order to launch them to a certain GPS coordinate. So our torpedo men were the only ones who knew what that GPS coordinate was, right? We get in position. We would set the missiles up. There's so many like electrical systems involved with setting these things, right, basically, onto their course. So we set them onto their course. We launch them up. We're generally around 50 feet when we launch them. That would be like, I guess, nominal or optimal in a sense. And they would launch them, and they would get to the GPS coordinate, and then from there, we have no idea what happens to them. We don't know. It takes over. The satellite takes over, and those come from people way higher than us, The torpedoes, on the other hand, are super interesting. I slept next to one for my first 2 months of deployment. They put these extra racks in the torpedo room because when we're on deployment, we do carry about 30 extra people with us because we need linguists and decryptors, basically. Because I was on a fast attack submarine. Right now, there's 3 different types of submarines. I was on a fast attack, and our job was to stay close to the coast of different nations and intercept messages. But when we did that, we would intercept a message and it'd be encoded. So we need these decryptors to figure out the code, decrypt them, and then we need the linguists who knew 3 different languages for that area, for the Middle East that we were in, to translate from whatever language they were in to English. Right. And the only people who knew what those messages said were the people who translated them and then the captain. And that was it. So I knew that we intercepted a lot of messages. I don't know exactly what was said or what was going on. I knew nothing.
Just to specify, so there are several kinds of submarines. Let's go over the kind that you were on. You kind of just explained it, but we missed it a little bit. You were actually on a submarine that intercepts messages.
Yeah, so I was on a fast attack, and fast attacks are the more stealthy. They're smaller than the other 2 types of submarines, and they're, I don't know, they're a bit more dangerous. We'll say we're the sneaky guys, the stealthy ones that go and hope that nobody detects us. The other types of submarines there's the SSBNs, SSGNs. SSBNs are so SS is silent service, and at least I'm pretty sure it's yes.
It's all right.
We'll go with that.
We'll follow you anyway.
Yeah. Anyways, the B means ballistic missile, and then N means nuclear. So my submarine was silent service nuclear. So the SS told you it was a submarine. This is where you get the like the CVNs, like the old school veterans with the CVN, whatever. It was like conventional something, whatever, like carriers or destroyers or frigates or whatever, right? So SSBNs carry nuclear missiles. They're called ballistic missiles. They carry 24 of them. They're about 24 feet long, I want to say, maybe 30 feet. I don't know exactly. But those things, those submarines aren't actually allowed to stop in any foreign ports because of the technology on the submarine, and also because there's 24 missiles on that. If they explode, they take out multiple cities, like within, I don't know, 300-mile radius or something. I don't know how big that boom is, but it's giant. It's gigantic.
They literally have stories of crazy stories that, like, I mean, it's super frowned upon, and obviously they keep out of the traditional media because our armed forces, at least the commander-in-chief, can keep it out of that. But I remember there's a story in, like, New Jersey of an Air Force plane dropping 2 nuclear bombs that weren't, thankfully, not, like, the catalyst wasn't fully initiated, dropping them, and, like, the catastrophe that could happen, and especially in a foreign port, right? You can't have that. So we know what ports those submarines are allowed to stop in. We generally don't take them anywhere foreign, and their deployments, we'll say, are a lot. Those submarines completely work a lot differently. So those submarines they have 2 crews. They have a blue and a gold crew, and my buddy's actually on one right now. But basically, they spend 3 months out to sea. They come into port for 1 month, and then they swap crews, and then the other crew goes out to sea for 3 months. And all that they do is they do figure eights in the ocean, just waiting for an order to launch a missile at someone. Way back when North Korea threatened that they were going to launch missiles at the U.S., right? We were thinking either Hawaii or the west coast of California, right? If that had happened, our first retaliation to bombing them back would be SSBNs. We have those stationed all over the world in foreign waters, just hanging out and just waiting for an order to launch missiles. That's their job. That's why North Korea doesn't bomb us, ladies and gentlemen, because they fucking know, dude. They have no fucking clue where these motherfuckers are, but they know that if they do something, it's trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. Sorry. No. Go ahead.
And then let's roll into torpedoes from there.
Well, yeah, I wanted to go ahead and talk about torpedoes and the rack rooms. And by the way, I'm just going to go ahead and preface this whole section of the conversation, because I've heard of motherfuckers sleeping in torpedo racks. I don't know if you've had that experience, but I wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, so basically in the torpedo room, it's just a bunch of racks that we can move around with hydraulics that carry torpedoes on them. But during deployment, we don't keep everything completely loaded because we have so many people. We have portable racks that are about 6 feet long by like 2 feet wide or something like that, right? And we have people actually sleeping on those racks. Like I said before, I had to sleep on one for my first deployment for the first 2 months, and I cuddled with one of our torpedoes. You know, our torpedo is about 24 feet long. It fits about 3 people alongside it. I had the very end of it. I called her Betty. But
was she cute?
She
was cute. She's cute.
She was torpedo green, you know, a normal color. So
intimidating, but cute.
Yeah, so they when they did operations to where they had to move torpedoes around, we all had to leave. They moved the racks, right? And they moved the torpedoes around, and they set the racks back up for us, whatever. But if we ever launched torpedoes, right, those would be the ones reloading torpedo tubes and whatever else. What's interesting about torpedoes, though, torpedoes work differently because there is a GPS system involved with them, but satellite cannot take over them. So what we do is we get a coordinate from what we hear from our sonar text, right? And we have an idea of where, if we're shooting a submarine, like we have an idea, or even a surface ship, we have an idea of where they're at. The torpedoes actually have 2,000 feet of cable at the end of it. So when we launch them out of the torpedo tubes, they'll go at a certain speed towards the target, but we have 2,000 feet. If we think that their torpedo is going to miss the target, we have 2,000 feet to change its electronics and change its coordinates so it can change direction and try to hit the target that we set.
So this is based off a signal. Sorry, I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah, this is based off of the signal that's still connected to the submarine, right?
And specifically the speed of the torpedo moving away from the speed of the submarine, right? So we're trying to combat that. I mean, obviously, most of the time, I assume that these.
Yeah. So generally, yeah. So when we get attacked, right, we have what's called countermeasures, right, and it's this whole procedure. But basically, we dive down at our deepest angle and we turn as far left as we possibly can. We turn left because our countermeasures are located on the right side of the submarine. Now, torpedo works. Torpedoes are sound sensing. They're sound seeking. So basically, it senses the sound of another ship's propeller. That's basically what it does, and it like syncs to it, and it's attracted by it. It's magnetic. Right, that's what it runs to. So when we get shot at with a torpedo, we dive down to the left, and out our right side we have two countermeasures that we launch. The first one we launch is like a giant firework that creates a static wall, as if you're watching the TV, but it was all static, right? Back in the old days, because there was no channel on that. There was no service on that channel.
10-4 Captain.
Yeah. And then, so we set that up as the screen. And then we have a second countermeasure that we launch that's like a pistol Pete, basically, that makes a louder sound than the static wall behind it, and it pinpoints it to the middle of that wall. So we're diving down to the left. That stuff's shooting off to our right, and we're hoping that the torpedo seeking us seeks the sound of our countermeasures and blows up on that sound rather than our propeller sound.
So this is you're starting to remind me of Flare, like their little aerial warfare here. With, I mean, instead of it being sound seeking, which I mean we keep talking about sound, but really what we're talking about is sonar, right? And that is ultimately what we're at. Okay, so no,
sonar is detection of sound.
But that clarifies it for me as well. Yeah. You know what I mean? So it's just one of those things. But
another thing I want to touch on too is we see how dolphins see. When we talk sonar, right, we talk about us, or like bats even. They send a sound out. They don't actually have eyes. They send sound out and they receive sound, and they get a picture in their head of what the area that they're going into actually looks like. What's crazy about a submarine is that when we're at our top speed, we don't get the sound back faster than we travel. Right, the technology that we have does not decipher it quick enough for us to see what's in front of us, and we do have to travel at top speed at times, because basically we're given a plot of 10 miles by 10 miles square of where our submarine is supposed to be 24/7 while we're in the water. So sometimes, when we run drills and stuff, it slows us down, and we might hit like the back end of that. So the captain wants to speed up and get to the front end of the square, because we know where we're going ultimately, but what we call Big Navy decides where we're supposed to be.
Yeah, you want to stay within the I don't want to say paradigm, but it essentially is the actual jurisdiction of where you are supposed to be, because even if it's no one else minds, hey, your government fucking minds.
Because Big Navy knows where we're at all times.
Exactly, and that's okay. So I have a little bit of a question here, because I'm a little bit jaded. I don't know how much of an offense certain countries take to certain things. I do believe that ultimately, look, China and America don't, and this is going off on a super long tangent. So this is not something that you can answer for me, but it's something that I think that there are little hints that we can see if we're in a particular position. Even though it was like 10 years ago or whatever, is going ahead and seeing like, look, China and America don't have great relations, but on military level, I believe that we have amazing relations, because either way, we're both gonna have the conflict is something that no one needs, right?
Yeah.
So the actual jurisdiction, I believe, is more fluid between, let's say, America and China than it is between America and North Korea,
and like Russia or North Korea,
or Russia. Yeah. So we don't need to get too deep into it, but I do want to ask this question because it's something that we're kind of just phasing into.
Yeah.
So just on the topic of talking about, jurisdiction, or even not, just where I don't know what you call it, but like almost like a militial political climate is like, what are we talking about when we go into international waters? Especially, I'm thinking in my head, and you can correct me. Just, if you're hovering around the oceans right off the continental shelf of Japan, like,
Yeah.
yeah,
So what we call big navy sort of has an idea of where other countries' ships and vessels are at, right? We all do the same things. At any one time, we should be able to assume that there's other countries' submarines off of our coast intercepting our messages, decoding it, and then interpreting it themselves, right? Because that's what our job is. So it's safe to assume that other countries have the same exact jobs too. But as far as our submarine goes and what we know as a crew, we don't know. We don't know anything. We do what we're told. We perform our missions, and we get whatever they ask of us done, right? And that's basically it. But there are times where we do kind of have these operations with allies, and even with our own ships. To where, for example, we did what's called war games. We did it with Great Britain once. They had a destroyer or something that had submarine detecting equipment. They wanted to test how good it was. So we went out to a specific area in the ocean where we met up with them, right? And then we had a few hours of them trying to hunt us and us trying to hunt them. And, we wrecked them. We basically sent them pictures of them in our periscope, right, with the crosshairs on their ship, basically. Right? Like, we're saying, yeah, we beat you guys. Like,
there's no
chance here. But with Chile, it was a little bit different. It was very surprising. We had a war game of 3 days long, and we were given an area, but Chile's ship was another submarine, and it was a diesel submarine. So they worked on batteries underwater, and they had to go recharge their diesels every now and then. What's crazy about this, right? So we're getting a depth that we have to stay at. They're given a depth that they have to stay at. It's one of the days we're above them, and the next day we're below them, right? So that way it gives equal advantage to both sides. What's crazy about all that, after 2 days of war games, they shot us 11 times, and we shot them once. Right, that's pretty insane. And we even, what's cool though is we got to exchange crew members. Like 3 or 4 crew members of ours went on their submarine, 3 or 4 of theirs went on our submarines to experience the different lifestyles. But I believe that like they beat us because the requirements for them to be on a submarine, they have to go through 4 years of college. They have to have a degree. The U.S. submarines, they don't care. They take 18-year-olds right out of high school. The cooks, the sonar techs, anybody who's non-nuclear can go right out of high school. The training for submarines is 3 months long, other than their A school that they go. So sonar tech might go to school for 2 to 3 months, maybe even 6 months. I don't know. I'm not a sonar tech. But they go to school to learn their basics, and then they go to submarine school after that, and then they get sent to their submarine, right? So by the age of 19, they're on our submarine helping us sort of with our missions. Another sort of weird fact, the average age on our submarine at one point was 23 years old. Like 130 men, 23 years old was the average age of everybody that was part of the crew. Like, that's insane. 23-year-olds commanding a submarine in the ocean, right? It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely ridiculous. And thinking about like inexperience, I mean, you just brought something up that kind of touches my heart a little bit, because I am the opposite of a traditionalist. I am a Silicon Valley traditionalist, where I say I don't need college. I can, do this. But
Yeah.
But there's also a certain amount of just like a basic life discipline. Now I'm 27 now, but
Yeah.
so I kind of understand a little bit more. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, 4 years of college education.
Yeah.
Time spent actually going through a similar process to what you went through when you were actually being educated specifically for this role.
Yeah.
And I mean, the efficacy of that system paid out, at least in your guys' war games. So it's like, I mean, it doesn't seem like rocket science, but you kind of just burst my bubble a little bit because I'm starting to think, man, shit, I need to go back to college. I do well there, but
Yeah, and what's a little bit interesting, if you're in the nuclear field, we get to skip submarine school altogether. Like, we don't get any prior submarine knowledge. There's nothing. And I think it's because at Prototype, we work on decommissioned submarines, right? The submarines that they used to have, that they pulled out of the water, they covered in cement, talked about it earlier. I think that's why they don't require us as nuclear engineers to go through submarine school, is because we already spent 6 months on one, learning all of its systems and how it works. Generally, I mean, we don't get to learn all the life support systems or anything in the forward part with the sonar and how that works, or how navigation works, or anything like that. But we do, when we do get to submarine, we do have submarine quals, and that kind of, it works exactly the same as nuclear quals, right? Signatures and checkouts and a lot of systems involved that interact with each other that we do have to know. We do have to go through a final board with the captain to say, hey, we know everything, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
yeah, the credentials are there as well. I since we're talking about, spending time not just necessarily in training, but at sea, not necessarily on deployment.
Yeah. So, because also with war games, you can say war games are also involve our own ships, right? So there's, in San Diego, it was a very nice place to get stationed because beautiful weather, beautiful beaches, beautiful women, right?
San Diego, brother.
Hey,
I've been there.
But the issue with being stationed on a submarine in San Diego, we had 6 submarines for 11 surface fleets. The surface fleets are the supporting ships of a carrier, including the carrier as well. So there were about, I think at that time, there were 5 carriers in San Diego as well. And anytime a carrier goes out, you will never see a carrier go out on the ocean by itself. It has destroyers, it has cruisers, it has frigates, it has like every ship that we have with it, right? And that's where you get those pictures that you see online with the actual fleets of like 11 ships. And guess what? There's always one submarine underneath the water with them as well, right? So for a time, that was us. But anytime any of those ships get any sort of submarine detecting equipment, and this could be from P3s. P3s are airplanes as well. Airplanes that have submarine detecting technology on them, like that's their whole job as a P3, to detect submarines. Or they've even had helicopters that can land on these carriers as well, and they have submarine detecting equipment. So anything that has submarine detecting equipment, anytime it gets updated or a new system is installed, they have to be tested before they're sent out into the real world with those things. So our schedules on board the submarine, right? We're not always out to sea. However, we did spend 2 to 3 weeks every single month out at sea, so these guys can, practice testing their systems on us, or practice finding us with their systems for that time. So it's really a kind of a crappy life.
Well, yeah, they're just exercising their ability to get you to go ahead and do double duty, but at the same time, I mean, there's obviously there's a reason why they do it. So it's not like they're just like
teasing. It needs to be done. Yeah, it needs to be done, right? And I was stationed on the submarine for 3 years and 9 months, which is shorter than a normal tour because I told you earlier that we had that 6-month training hold, right? So I should have been 4 years and 3 months on the submarine. However, out of that 3 years and 9 months that I was stationed to the submarine, I spent 1 year and 3 months actually on the pier in port, trying to enjoy San Diego, because when you're in port, there are still security requirements for the amount of people on board. You still need protection on the submarine, so that required 1/3 of the crew, so 40 or so people. So that means that every 3 days you had to work a 24-hour duty day. So my hours worked while I was on the submarine, while we were in port for the 1 year and 3 months, on average, I worked between 70 to, I believe, 110 hours on board the submarine. And the way you get to 110, right? You're like, that's weird. If your duty day lands on a Sunday, okay, your next duty day will be 3 days later on a Wednesday, and your next duty day will be 3 days later on a Saturday, right? And you still had to show up for work Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. So you worked 7 days in a row. Like it's pretty insane, but that's just what we had to do while we were in port.
Yeah, what did the actual social dynamic look like there? And by that I literally mean, like, you know, if you're going to be spending 7 days a week with maybe days that are a little bit lighter because you're at port and you're not on your duty day,
you would think that they were lighter.
Right.
Here's the thing: you can only do major maintenance while you're in port as well.
So you're it's all hands on deck, brother. That's what they say.
So yeah, being part of the nuclear field, we had major ticket items that we only did in port. So those were like during the week. So it was a lot of time spent on board. It was so much time that, you know, you easily spent more time with let's say a married person than they did with their own wife, easily, right? Because you spent all that time in port together, and then on top of that, you were out to sea 2 to 3 weeks every single month, right? So it was pretty brutal, but I mean, you got to know people inside and out. It's pretty insane how close you got to people.
Yeah, exactly. And people, so I mean, just not having that free time. I mean, I imagine people had to look, there's no way they can sustain the armed forces, especially just the Navy, especially on submarines, without allowing you guys some allowance. Did you guys actually get to spend any time just going into San Diego? And
oh yeah, absolutely. And there's a term that we use that's not used anywhere else, right? And we always ask people, oh, what did you do during your free time? Did you go out to town? Right? The simple phrase, out to town. Like, who says that in real life? Nobody does, because they're not stuck on a pier, right? Yeah. So you always, I don't know. It was kind of, it's just funny to ask somebody that now, and like knowing that you're one of the only few who actually know like why you would even say that.
Exactly. It's like, hey, what do you mean out to town? Bro, homie, I live in town. 95% of people, unless you're living in fucking Bakersfield, you fucking hicks. No, I'm just kidding. I love you guys. All right. No, it's a real struggle. I remember just like spending time in San Diego, and like these are also things that you don't actually realize until you grow up a little bit. You know, you have some friends in the armed forces. You know, they come back and they tell you about this. I mean, we all know that there's like two main points for the Navy SEALs where they're trained in San Diego and fucking Fort whatever on the East Coast. And like I assume you guys are not hand in hand, but hand in hand. You know what I mean? You guys are arm's length. So
yeah, there's a few things with that too. The Navy SEALs did train in San Diego, and just being in the nuclear field. So they compare the SEALs with the nuclear field pretty closely, actually. But the SEALs are more the physical aspect, the very highly physical people, and the requirements for physicality are extremely high for them. And the nuclear field, it's the opposite, where it's the mentality capacity is extremely high, and not everybody can go through the nuclear field and pass it. There's a lot of people who fail out. Even the ones who were trained to be there, the straight A students, they're all straight A students. Even those guys failed out. So the difficulty was on par as far as being a nuclear engineer and being a SEAL. The difficulty was the same, just in a different sense.
The ability to maintain your intellect even under the immense stress of certain situations. I mean, that's actually super underrated. Most people won't actually totally understand that, but it's a real fucking thing, right? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
It's I mean, like when you start, because your intelligence, I mean, it remains, but the way that your brain actually functions underneath an incredibly strenuous environment,
yeah, absolutely,
that will change.
Yeah,
and especially pressure, right?
Yeah,
so.
Even working on a nuclear power plant, there's still there's a lot of requirements for things that you have to know immediately. All the immediate actions for all the casualty procedures is the very one thing that was, if you knew nothing about nuclear power, you had to know those things as a nuclear engineer, period. End of story. The other thing that was sort of required to know, but more based on your own knowledge, was in what book to find certain procedures. If we were cooling down the reactor, there's a procedure for that. Where do you find it? I don't know. It's one of 20 different books that had operating procedures in them, but we had to know in which book to find what and how to navigate it through there. Granted, it wasn't a requirement, right? So it wasn't like in a sense like time. What do you call that?
I don't know, but you guys are doctors. You guys are making the new nuclear Frankenstein is what we're talking about here.
Yeah,
bro.
yeah. We're not allowed to operate without procedures. We were only required to know where to find what we were doing in what book, right? And that was it.
No, absolutely. Yeah, man. And honestly, like when we're talking about this, I think that I mean, the knowledge is fairly limited, but this is one of those things that anyone listening will just have a general fascination with, just because it is, they come out with Chernobyl, right? They come out with Chernobyl, this massive blockbuster on fucking Amazon, whatever. Great movie. We all heard about it. We all played, most of us, at least our age played fucking Modern Warfare. We all knew about Chernobyl fucking years before, and obviously that was a nuclear reactor going wrong. You were underwater, but you do have some intelligence and experience when it comes to nuclear fission and reactors. Is if you just want to go ahead and give us just a small rundown of the differences between underwater nuclear fission and
Yeah, I mean, basically it all works the same, right? There's a fuel. Basically the only thing that we want out of a nuclear power plant is for heat to be produced. So let's take away nuclear power plants, let's take away coal, let's take away gasoline. How do we produce electricity, right? That basic question is answered with electrical theory. Electrical theory states, basically, anything that spins can produce electrical power. So how do you get something to spin, right? The answer they came up with,
energy.
You produce steam, and you can pressurize steam to spin something that has fan blades on it, right? Perfect. So this whole time they've done with coal, right? Keep filling up the coal, keep it on fire, produces steam or produces heat. You can run water over it in another closed system. The water will heat up and produce steam, and then you can pressurize that and then push something forward to make it spin, right? So how does nuclear fission come into this? Basically, you can get a material, a certain material, we'll say, in layman's terms, to spontaneously fission.
Fucking with you. No, I'm just fucking. All right, go.
You can get a material to spontaneously fission, and what happens with the fission is that it makes the material. It is kind of janky, but whatever. It makes the material come unstable, and it'll explode. That's what a fission is. Is this material exploding? That's a fission. But when it explodes, we don't care what's produced out of it. We just care that it actually explodes, because in the explosion, it produces a small amount of heat, right? So if you have millions to billions of these explosions happening all at once, you're producing a lot of heat there. And nuclear reactors without water can melt themselves through the earth down to the core if you really wanted to.
And ladies and gentlemen, this is actually what happened in Chernobyl. Is they turned off all the fail safes, unfortunately, and this is to my understanding.
Yeah, Chernobyl. We actually had a confidential book on Chernobyl, and it was human mistake after human mistake after human mistake after human mistake, not believing the readings that they were given, because when you're working in a nuclear power plant for so long, you learn its flaws, you learn the things it has trouble with, you learn the things that are normal, but to somebody else that's never been there would think that they're abnormal, right? You have to live with those certain things. It's just part of its personality, we'll say.
Yeah, the idiosyncrasies of
right?
that system.
Even we had those, right?
Absolutely.
Even not only with our nuclear reactor, but also with the different equipment that we had on board. We knew what worked, we knew what didn't, right? We knew all these things, and we knew how to make the system work and how to get by.
But you guys also had a phenomenal system, or just a structured system where the idiosyncrasies, the axioms remain the same. So if we're going to turn down, safety whatever 1, we don't turn down 2 and 3. We keep those up, because if the water needs to flow through, the water's got to fucking flow.
All of our safety systems were up and operational. And what's insane about the designs of nuclear reactors now is that you can get rid of the power completely in a nuclear reactor, and it will be taken care of in a sense. There's so many safety options available for the nuclear reactor that are automatic, to where if there's nobody there, even if it's running, if there's nobody there, it'll continue operating safely. And then once it runs out of power, it'll shut down safely. And then if there's a catastrophe, it'll shut down and maintain itself safely as long as all the systems are intact.
As long as nothing's actually like physically.
Yeah. So let's go to Japan for the example. When the tsunami hit the coast of Japan, it actually hit a nuclear power plant, right? This is the issue why that was such a major nuclear accident, is because the last ditch effort to save a nuclear power plant is to flood it with water. That's why all nuclear power plants are located next to a body of water, and because you have pipes and pumps connected to that water, to where if something goes wrong, you flood it with water to cool it down. That's how you save it, basically. But in Japan, that tsunami hit, it knocked out their pipes, it knocked out power. The pumps of those pipes weren't even operating. The pipes weren't even connected to the ocean anymore, so they couldn't cover it with water. Like, it was a huge deal. It actually hit, I think that was 2011. And what's interesting, they were asking us on board the submarine if anybody actually spoke Japanese, because they were asking for volunteers from the U.S. Navy to go and help with their nuclear accident. Yeah, it's pretty insane.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. Just to kind of, I mean, we're gonna completely derail this, but to a fascinating point. I mean, like, that's what we do now. One of my best friends in Colorado is actually, his father is one of the top firefighters in the nation. It's like when we have these California wildfires, dude, they call people in from all, you know what I mean, the most qualified people to come in. And I mean, it's actually like, it kind of gives me a little bit of a life affirming feeling, just knowing that, like, this is kind of like I you know, globalization. I don't know, I'm not political, but it is one of those things where it's like, yo, we can use people from all over the world to really solve our problems. We can. Like,
And one more thing I want to touch on with Chernobyl. If you ever watch that show,
oh, he's gonna debunk all.
No, I'm not gonna debunk everything. It was a drama show, right? So
That's
a lot of it was somewhat real. A lot of it was somewhat false. But what it didn't tell you were a few things. Well, one thing that I really want to touch on is that they spent months with helicopters flying over the nuclear power plant, dropping graphite is what they dropped on it first to help cool it down. And then they dropped sand on top of that. But everybody on each one of those helicopter rides or each one of those plane rides died. And they didn't show that in the show. The other thing I want to point out about it is if you want to learn how reactivity works and how nuclear power plants work, episode 6, when they're in court and during the trial, the scientist gives such a good explanation of exactly how it works without saying anything confidential. Like, it's incredible how well that was presented. That was the biggest surprise to me of that show, was episode 6 in the trial of how everything got out of hand.
And I think in the end, that's actually what impressed most of us. No, I'm not going to say most of us, but I'm just saying the fact that they actually chose, because obviously they're going to dramatize it. Even if the producer said don't dramatize it, it's like they're going to do it because that's what actors do. But at the same time, the fact that they can get things, you know, somewhat correct, and honestly, where this isn't like a weighing fest over the show, you know, Chernobyl, but it was such a monumental moment in our history, just because we, you know, for the longest time it was like, oh, we have this incredible system, we have this incredible technique we can use to push the human race forward, but here are the consequences. So now it scared people away, but I still think we should still use. Like, I don't think that it should be the end of nuclear.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely. And the radiation is not enough to make a major difference on the planet. What we're dealing with now is we go into global warming now, right? Natural gases, fossil fuels, coal. Those coal plants that were produced from our first ideas of how to produce heat so we can produce steam, so we can turn something, that's now coming back at us because it is producing these fumes on the earth that are greenhouse gases that are heating up our planet. Granted, I don't want to get into that whole conversation.
We don't need to, but I hear you.
But that's what we're trying to steer away from now, and nuclear power allows that. It just produces a little bit of radiation, but diluted. It's not enough to affect anyone. I'm still going to live my full life, right? And it's just showing that I worked at a nuclear power plant, and I will not die because of radiation causes. That's what I'm trying to say.
Oh no,
right?
no,
It doesn't
massive.
have that major of an effect.
Well,
Yeah.
no, please, yeah. Sorry.
And there is a treaty around the world that all countries agree with not attacking another nation's nuclear power plants. That is in existence. That does exist. Everybody signed on it. So we do have somewhat of a safety net saying, hey, don't kill large massive populations because you want to destroy a nuclear power plant, right?
Yeah, and at the end of the day, I do think that it's one of those things that we're fighting now economically, and we'll find a solution at some point to the issue, to the political issue surrounding, nuclear power, because it may not be right now in the United States. It may not have the most efficacy. It may not provide power to everyone, but it's a sure as fuck a more powerful plan than the actual. Well, we're here. I'm just gonna say this, and once again, we're gonna cut most of this out because what we're doing right now is we're propagating the entire government. I mean, we're literally propagating the Saudis and the Qatars off of the back. Like friendly people, cool, but the royal family has $20 trillion, and the whole point is they're starting sports. They're already infiltrating other parts of our communities. That's fine. But we have to actually watch the way that they, navigate that. It gets super messy, and nuclear power would have been a good way, 10, 20 years ago to go ahead and, so get rid of that issue, really.
Yeah.
But,
and what's crazy is they're still trying to up the technology on it. They want to, the U.S. was experiencing, while I was in, I heard stories of them experimenting with nuclear-powered aircrafts. But, you get... I mean, I don't want to say Japan has a stigma to it, but kamikaze pilots, right? You kind of...
There's a stigma.
All they'd have to do is crash a nuclear-powered airplane, and you'd probably wipe out a whole city.
Well, and if it was Japan, that would be the end of that.
Yeah.
No military forever, which is unfortunate because I don't think that Japan holds and harbors, similar values. But you also have to, watch where you're standing, man. You know what I mean? Sometimes your ground is shaky even if you're a good person. It gets weird, right?
Yeah, for sure.
All right, let's go ahead and continue this tomorrow.
Yeah.
We hit 2 hours, which is fucking impressive, bro.
Hell yeah.
That's
I was
not
expecting
easy.
2 hours.
That's not easy, though. That's not easy.
Yeah.
It's hard as shit, so. So, Aaron, what I've found about just bureaucracy in general, forget the military, is that oftentimes things get confused. But it sounds like you have a serious story about how it actually kind of went wrong in this case, and some dire consequences for some people.
Yeah. So I'm going to preface this with we in the nuclear field in the Navy, right? You have training every week on some new topic in the nuclear field, and there's one person in your division that's in charge of making that training every week, and it rotates through for the most part. I've had to do 2 of those trainings myself, right? And you produce these questions afterwards that you give to. There's a role on board of one of the not really super high ups, but one of the guys who are higher than you, right? And that guy's in charge of creating a test every month based on the questions that he's given by everybody doing these trainings. And then those questions will reflect at the end of the month on this written exam that all the nuclear power plant workers have to take, right? It's a continued training program is what they call that. But how it worked on the submarine is that guy creating those tests also made the answer keys for them, and he would generally make copies of them all and hand them out to most of the people on board. So I knew, especially in my first month, it was eye-opening to me because I knew that was coming, but I didn't know that everybody essentially cheated on the exam. Everybody was given the questions and the answers before the exam even was there, right? So my first time getting one of those, I was in a restroom stall, right? And a guy comes in next to me, and he throws some 2 slips of paper underneath the stall, right? And I'm like, oh, I'm like, okay, cool. Thank you. And I knew what it was. It was questions and answers, and I knew the test was coming up. Right. So he didn't want me to get, essentially like fucked right away. So that's what happened. That's how it worked. And every month, like since that moment, I went to him. I'm like, hey man, you got the answers yet? Right. And the trick, like it took me 2 months because I was doing like a 4.0 is the highest grade you can get on that exam. If you get all the questions right, it's 4.0. You have to get higher than a 2.5, I think, maybe a 2.8, maybe somewhere around there, like a C average, right? So like 2 months go by and I'm getting like 3.5s on these things. And one of my division guys, one of my coworkers comes to me. He's like, hey man, he's like, I saw the grade on your test. Like, don't score that high, right? He's like, keep it down a little bit. They're gonna think too much of you.
Fair warning.
Right? They're gonna think you're too smart, right? You're putting expectations on yourself that you don't want. And I said, all right, cool, man, thanks.
Can I give a filler story? Just about what I know about Silicon Valley, even startups. It's just a fascinating little side note. Is if you are a super successful startup and you'll have the fucking plethora of VAs or VCs up on Sand Hill, up in like Woodside and Palo Alto, coming in to go ahead and provide you money. And it's like, dude, experienced VCs or experienced entrepreneurs will come to you and be like, don't accept more than like $5 million up front, then $15 million in the next 2 years. Like it's kind of the same thing though. It's like, hey, these people are wise. They're like, hey man, you can't score that high because we'll see it. I do want to ask one more thing. With these tests, obviously it's appealing. How many people actually did, I don't want to say cheat because I think it's kind of something that is happening, but cheat,
Yeah. Well, this happens on every single boat, right? I say this with the knowledge that I know. I'm not saying I've been on every single boat. I'm not saying I've been on more than one submarine. I've been on one submarine. I know that every nuclear power plant worker in the Navy has to take these tests monthly. And I've heard stories of my other shipmates, right, on their submarines, and I can say to 99% sure that this happens on every single boat out there.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just want to cover that because I want to make sure that people understand that this is just kind of the system.
Yeah.
Right?
And then, because that goes into the next sort of thing, prototype, right? I talked about prototype last session. The hands-on training at a nuclear power plant. The staff messed up with the reactor coolant pump maintenance, right? That halted training. The other plant violated their BFPL curve. That halted training as well. The issue with the second thing happening, the BFPL curve violation, that caused a major disruption in the nuclear Navy. And there's a bigger figure involved called nuclear reactors. And they are civilians and people in the Navy, like extremely high up people, who go to every submarine, go to every nuclear carrier. They go to all the prototypes, which when I say all, there's only 4. And they test yearly everybody's ability to pass a written test of basic knowledge, right? And then they have like these sort of like 1-on-2, 2-on-2 conversations. So you and a buddy will go and get like an oral examination, right? And they'll ask you questions. You'll have to answer them. And then the third thing about it is they do operational tests. So they want to see how well you do certain procedures on the plant that are normal stuff, like I forget what they call it now, but basically cycling water through the steam generators to clean the water, or doing a primary plant sample. That's where we have this station where the ELTs go in with all their hazmat suits, and they take a sample of the liquid from the primary cooling system to make sure that there's enough chemicals involved, right? Because everything has a tolerance, everything has a spec, we'll say. So everything has to be kept in spec, right? And if it's out of spec, then the ELTs know to add certain chemicals, how much of it, whatever, right? It's all down to a science now. The other thing too is they judge casualty procedures and how well we run those, and just like different random things. Like I was a calibration guy, right? I got watched on how I calibrated one of my pressure switches, right? Just simple stuff like that.
Yeah.
However, at prototype, after those two things happened, nuclear reactors got involved and said, hey, we're going to run what's called a mini ORS on you, which this is the only time I've ever heard of a mini ORS. Generally, every test every year that they run is called an ORS, right? And it's 3 days long of just straight testing. You're running drills a lot. You hardly get any sleep. Like, it's insane. It's madness. So they ran this mini ORS, right? Because they didn't think it was a huge deal, but maybe the crew there needed a reminder, right? So the written test portion is always given to somebody who's in charge of giving those tests at that site, right? At that command. So the guy in charge had the questions and he had the answers, and guess what? He was making copies of those answers so he can hand them out to all the crew members on at prototype, right? So they knew what was coming up, they knew all the answers, right? And this 100% applied to submarine as well. All of our ORSes, we had the questions and the answers to every single one, right? So he was making copies at the copier, and I don't know the full story. I don't know exactly what happened, but basically there was a paper jam, and for some reason he could not get the answer key out of the copier. At some point later, I'm pretty sure one of the nuclear reactors guys goes to make copies, figures out it's jammed, and then figures out how to unjam it, and with that pulls out an answer key. Right?
This is literally the most painful story from all of our high school experiences, you guys. So if you're feeling a little bit of pain, just imagine it happens at every level of society. God damn, I feel so bad for him. At the same time, so this was I imagine a major scandal in the realms of
yeah, and it gets worse, right? So that gets found out. So then they do a big like all stop, and they have some more training and whatever repercussions came from it they had to deal with. So initially it was like a 2-month training hold, right? And then the answer key gets jammed, gets found. They extend it to 4 months, right? And then eventually it takes 6 months for this training hold to stop, right? So to where we can get our signatures again. Again, I had 3 signatures left during all this time, and it just kept getting extended. So that's how I missed my first deployment, if you remember that. But the other major thing that happens in the Navy, I don't know about the military in general, but in the Navy, right, is when these incidents happen, there always has to be someone to blame, right? The court system in the Navy isn't really a court system. It's like all the higher ups get together, everybody involved makes a statement, but whoever receives those statements decides ultimately who is going to take the blame or the punishment for this incident that occurred. So we have to explain when you tell the higher ups, right? When I had to tell my captain that I was not going to re-enlist under him, right? Everything changed at that moment for me, because their re-enlistments on their record make them look better, and captains are staying in. They've been in for 20 years already. They're staying in for 30, possibly 40. They want to keep climbing that chain.
Can I ask the novice question that we're all going to ask at this point?
What's that?
Is like, your captain, obviously, I mean, most people who get into that position, no disrespect, but it's one of those things, is like, if you're not going to re-enlist underneath this man or woman, but men typically,
yeah.
What led you to that? Let's just get into that, because that's actually important. That's what people will ask next.
Oh, I want to say that. That's okay. We'll do that. So, side story. So you have like a yearly review board every year, right, on the submarine. Well, at every command, basically, where you sit down with your captain. This is, again, from a submarine point of view, so I don't know who it is with anywhere else. So I sat down with my captain, my chief, a bunch of other chiefs, the EDMC, a bunch of higher-up officers, the engineer, the WEPS officer, right? All these guys, they take you in a room, and they ask you different questions. They're like, oh, what are you looking for out of the Navy? Right, and like, you know, are you looking to? They ask you if you're looking to re-enlist. It was kind of funny because one of those times, like, he didn't really care. My first interview, right? Because I was there for 6 months, right? He's there for another year and a half. He still has another interview with me, right? So he didn't really care. He didn't really ask me if I was re-enlisting or not. But also, he couldn't really take me seriously because I still had 3.5 years to serve, right? So it was kind of funny. One of the last questions he asked me, I'm like, oh, he's like, oh, can I get you anything? I'm like, yeah, actually, I was looking for hot chocolate and there's no hot chocolate. I didn't find any. And so,
oh my goodness! I'm sorry, I can't do that. Oh dear. Sorry, Aaron.
My chief starts laughing. And the captain gets up. He stands up. The way a submarine is built, there's a side door there at the end of this officer's stateroom that is connected to the galley, so he can immediately talk to the head cook. And that's exactly what happened. He said, "Hey," he opens that door. He said, "Hey, chief, whatever," right? He's like, "Get me a cup of hot chocolate," right? And the chief's like, "On it, sir," right? And then he comes back, right? The captain keeps talking to me like as if nothing happened. And then he comes back, and the chief gives him the glass of hot chocolate. He's like, "Give it to Petty Officer Erato over there." And I said, "All right, cool." I said, "Oh, thank you," right? And I got my hot chocolate that day.
You see, this gets wicked because you don't think about the armed forces actually acting in this way, and I totally get it. It's like there's a system, like forget bureaucracy. There's a system, and there's, like, okay, so just to go off on another little tangent, is like there's Daco Willing who served for the Marines forever in Ramadi and in the Middle East. Is like there's kind of a funny thing is like, I believe that the military has great leaders, but it's like most of those men who climb up the pedestal and stay there, you know what I mean? It's because they actually figure out, it's like, you know what? Aaron's doing a really great job. How can I give him the benefit of his great job? Like, how can I give him a promotion? How can I give him more responsibility? How can I do these things? Obviously, this isn't totally linked in, but you're just making me think about these because it happens in all sectors of the armed forces. And then, like, this is a funny one because I was expecting a story like that. And then homie Aaron, ladies and gentlemen, says, hot chocolate. All right. Let's go there. No, exactly.
Hell yeah. But yeah, so that came from, right, let's go all the way back to Prototype now, how they want to blame this guy, right, and how people look down on you after getting out. You ask how that happened, the review boards, how it happened, right? So this guy at Prototype, this is a random guy. He was not in charge of creating the questions on the test. He was not in charge of creating the answers, right? Everything was given to him. Or I take that back. This guy was not involved in any of that. It was not given to him, right? However, this guy was getting out in 6 months, and the guy who got the actual answer sheet jammed in that copier was not getting out. So he wanted to continue his career. He wanted to be unflawed, right? And his higher-ups saw that, and they respected him for it. So when all the statements came through from that incident, I don't know exactly what happened. I don't know what was written. I don't know how it was done. But somehow the blame was put on this guy that was getting out in 6 months, right? When he had nothing to do with it. This I've seen twice in my career. We'll go over the second story later on in the podcast, just not now. That's a more personal one of a really good buddy of mine. But yeah, but that's it's kind of fucked.
It's destined to be fucked, and honestly, I don't think that there's an easy solution to most of these. I feel like there's a lot of pretense and a lot of the actual structural side to these military formats that I've seen a lot of buddies go through, and you go ahead and you give them credence because it's not like there's not a reason for why the military does things the way they do. There is efficacy, there's an efficiency, and there's a way that you get there, but also is specifically designed to go ahead and keep you in line. And Aaron, I'm going to be honest with you, is your friend, someone that, I mean, we haven't known each other for long, but for 1 month, right?
Yeah.
The most interesting in the world, or the most interesting thing in the world for me is seeing someone a lot like myself. I hate the term creative, but someone who is creative and who is very free thinking and a free spirit on a submarine. You gotta be fucking kidding me, dude.
Yeah, right.
So I respect it, but I'm just saying I could do anything for a year, but not for 4. Fuck that, dude. I'm telling you, I couldn't do it for 4. So
yeah. All the statements that were written, and eventually the blame was put on my buddy who was getting out. who was a radio man, but he was not the one behind the scandal, right? Because it was a chief behind the scandal. Chief wanted to continue his career. He was not getting out, so they saved him and put the blame on my buddy who was getting out.
Okay, so essentially, because I've heard this story before, it happened a lot right after a lot of our troops in the army returned from Afghanistan, where they had been literally centrally located between the Afghani Taliban and a bunch of like real hostile troops.
Yeah.
And then they came back, and because it wasn't like a share of the profit, it was a weird one where they got dishonorably discharged for reasons that you would never have normally done so. Just go ahead and give me the lowdown on that.
Okay, so the second story with my buddy getting out then, right? That's okay. Yeah, so after I had gotten off the submarine, right, I was out honorably discharged. They went back on deployment, and the captain had said that nobody's going to get emails for this deployment, right? Which is typically that's a normal thing. Nobody really receives emails during deployment. It's a lot more time spent to download them when we're topside with our receiving masts out, right? So what happened was there was a ring of chiefs, and even the XO was involved with bribing the radio chief. The radio chief is in charge of receiving all messages sent through that receiving mast that we have. So they bribed him. The radio chief sent emails to these people who gave him money. And eventually the incident leaked out enough to where the captain heard about it. And once the captain heard about it, it was a major incident. Everybody did their round of statements for this incident. And obviously the statement from the radio chief had mentioned that it was my buddy. His name was Denny. Right? Because that's the only way to pull him in to get this kid in trouble. He was 24, right? I think at the time. But he was a radio man, so obviously he could be involved with that scandal. So he was getting out within, 3 months or so. The radio chief was staying in, so the radio chief protected himself in that instance and probably had the help of the XO as well. That's a lot of power there. So right before my buddy got out, he went to captain's mast. They demoted him to a rank below him and took money away from him, right? Those are the two major punishments that come from that. And yeah, it's just a shit thing that happened, but it happens probably more than you think in the Navy.
Can I ask a question about the political situation that you experienced there? Because, my literally my best friend, man I won't name for now because he's actually stationed out,
Yeah.
Like doing his thing. He is planning on going ahead and earning his pension, which for that, how many years do you actually need to go ahead and earn the lifelong?
You have to have 20 years in.
So,
period. If you do reserves, it's more than 20 years. They have a calculation there.
Exactly. So it's one of those things where it's like, especially if you're close or not, I can imagine people protecting themselves, even if it's not, let's see, it's definitely not ethical to go ahead and push off blame down the ladder to, a radio man who's like, hey, I'm doing my best and I thought I was following orders, but then you have a higher up doing the same thing. It's like this is a huge issue, I think, just in society in general, which we're not going to get into, but I'm just saying you can expect it in the military. Yeah,
absolutely. And then also, like, it sort of happens in another way. There was a story just released a few years ago about one of our chiefs that were on board. He was a mechanic. He was a really, really hard-working guy while I knew him. And just this random story popped up on my Facebook one day, because we have my submarine is USS Hampton, so we have a group of USS Hampton alumni basically. So it popped up on that group, and I read it, and basically what it said was that this chief is getting kicked out of the Navy after 19 years of service because he shared prescription pills with other chiefs, right? this is an insane story because something as small as that, generally nobody cares about, right? That's like if you get a tattoo while you're in the Navy. If you're not on a submarine, you have to run like a tattoo, what we call a chit, right? Permission slip to get a tattoo and where it's going to be and what it's going to be of. Generally on the submarine, they don't care about that. Just get your tattoo. They'll deal with it later, right? Same thing here. Like this sharing prescription pills is such a small thing to happen. But it happened, and I don't know the full story, but I can guess that it happened because somebody higher up than him did not like him as a chief and wanted to make sure he was kind of fucked on his way out. Right. And it's a sad story. He spent so much time. He was almost at the 20 years for his lifetime pension or whatever. And he just got fucked.
And so honestly, like just hearing that, you know, given the bureaucracy and the way that things actually played out, hearing someone who's been in, you know, the armed forces and the Navy for so long, you know, getting the short end of the stick, how did that end up playing out? I mean, was he a major sponsor in your life? Like,
I mean, yeah. I mean, there were times when he definitely, especially during qualifications, right? During qualifications, right? You learn all the systems, and you have to get signatures by certain people, right? This chief definitely signed my qual card for sure because he was the only one allowed to on one of the signatures. Because it was all of his systems all combined, right? All 7 systems in the machinery room, which was his room, right? That had the oxygen generator, the diesel generator, the battery was nearby, the hydraulic systems, right? All the heart and soul of submarines is in that room. But there is something called blazing in the Navy, right? When it comes to qualifications as well. Granted, this chief never blazed anything on my qual card, but other people definitely have blazed things on my qual card. And if we go back to talking with the captain, right, and the review boards and stuff, I was actually on schedule to be qualified when I was supposed to be qualified. They give you a year and a half in the nuclear field to be qualified for your last watch, right? And I was on schedule. That captain wanted his record to look even better, right? His resume. So he threatened my chief with his career, and he threatened a few other officers with their careers, right? He said if I don't know what he said, he did this all behind my back. But basically, he's like, if you guys do not get him qualified, right, my voice on your eval is going to mean a lot, and it's going to kill your career, right? So like after that review board had happened, right, I knew something was definitely weird. I didn't know what, but people were asking me if I wanted checkouts, right? And I was like, yeah, sure. I'm not really ready for it, but yeah, we can go ahead, right? And some of them just blatantly, what you call blazing. They blatantly just signed like signatures on these systems that I never had a question asked about them at all, right? It's pretty insane, but that captain's beliefs were that the people in the nuclear field will learn more on watch than they would by learning every system through a book, right? That's what he believed. And then the second thing was just boosting his career, making his resume look stronger than that.
So I'm not supporting, you know, someone who may not have had yours or your associate's best interest at heart. But what I will say is I actually tend to agree. So I don't know if I just misunderstand a little bit, just because like the pragmatic application going into a job, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Means more to me than theory. That's also the way I learned this. So I'm just asking.
I have that same theory as well. But there's certain ways to go about it, right? Especially in the nuclear field. Sure, like we all got by. And you do have an ultimate like review board after all your quals have been signed anyways with the captain himself, right? So it's you, it's a captain, it's a bunch of nuclear chiefs, it's the engineer in that same room that he gave me that hot chocolate, right?
Hot chocolate.
And I have a giant whiteboard, and he asks me a bunch of questions, and I have to answer all those questions to the best of my knowledge, right? So that's the more important thing with qualifications. The other thing about blazing signatures is not only does it exist in qualifications, it exists in maintenance as well, right? A submarine is a personality. There's certain equipment on board a submarine that will never be fixed, can never be fixed, or just the captain doesn't want them to be fixed at all. Going back to the same captain, a lot of things to say about this guy. However, there's something called dry dock, and when we pull into dry dock, right, this is a submarine being pulled by 2 tugboats into in San Diego. We had this ship that was just completely empty, and what they had like 2 wing walls on the sides of it, and the portion that was empty was probably, it was a football field long by I don't know, let's just say like 30 yards wide, maybe 40 yards, enough to hold a submarine there, right? And what happens when you go into dry dock, it's a 28-hour evolution, right, being tugged into this dry dock. The dry dock has to sink itself, so it uses its wing walls, which are about 10 feet wide by a football field long, and most of it is just water tanks. It's air tanks, right? So you flood it with water, and it sinks down into the ocean, right? And then once the tugboats, once it's down enough, submarine moves into that empty space, and there's wooden blocks, curved wooden blocks on the bottom. Divers will go down, and they can actually move these wooden blocks to line up with the bottom curvature of the submarine, right? And then over the next 14 hours, the wing walls deflood themselves, and it floats back up, and you have a submarine that's completely out of the water. So you can do major repairs. You can cut holes into the hull and remove major generators or replace major generators. And there's cranes there to help you do all that stuff.
Just for listeners, what's that called again?
That is called dry dock.
Dry dock.
That's how the one works in San Diego. There are different dry docks and different methods to get a submarine out of water, but that is how we did it in San Diego.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean that's incredible. The fact that that's how you repair. I mean that's a whole another podcast. Fuck us, ladies and gentlemen. That's a whole another hour right there.
Yeah.
It really
it
is.
Sucks. You're like, it's like I don't know, a Tuesday or something, right? And you go to work at 6 a.m. right, and like you're going into dry dock, so you actually come with all your stuff packed for like 2 days worth, right? You're eating food on the submarine. And it just sucks. You're just sleeping in your rack on board, and you're not even out to sea. You're next to the pier in San Diego, right? You can go to the top of the submarine. You can see downtown San Diego from where you're at.
It sounds sweet. I spent a week on Union Bay, but I was riding jet skis, not scrubbing down a submarine.
Yeah.
So,
but what I wanted to touch on that dry dock specifically. So dry docks generally happen after deployment. So when I first got to my submarine, I pretty much immediately entered 6 months of deployment, right? Because 6 months of dry dock. Because of the training hold, I missed the whole 6 months of deployment, right? So then we went to dry dock after that. That captain was praised heavily because supposedly, right? Well, it actually happened. We were supposed to be in dry dock for about 4 months. We were in dry dock for 3 months. So he was praised for getting us out of dry dock a month early. The other thing, though, was that he was praised for saving the Navy $1 million in equipment, right? And he didn't save the Navy that money. He just didn't repair the equipment, right? So now our personality or our submarine had personality. Like we as operators, especially being an electrician, I knew all the machines that worked and didn't work, right? However, when you take your logs and you're underway, those logs don't just stay with the submarine. They go past the submarine to what we call Big Navy. So how do you get something and make it seem like it works when it actually doesn't, and you know it doesn't, right? Generally, here's the answer. Generally, everything has gauges on it. So what we did with a few of our machines, right, and they're simple stuff. They're not like major life-threatening machines. They're like something that cleans the air, what we called a precipitator, or there was something else that was broken that was never fixed. Either way, right, you take the gauge, right, you open it up, you mess with the gauge, you're able to move the needle without the machine affecting it at all, and you put it to where it's supposed to be, right, the whole time you're underway. And nobody really questions anything until you pull into port again, and the engineer, which is like the third highest ranking officer on board, crosses by that equipment and he sees the gauge still at that spec when it's supposed to be at 0, right? He knows that something's up. Right, so he's like, I don't know if he knew exactly that we did it. Obviously, we tried our best to not tell the stories correctly and try to,
fudge the numbers. Dude, you reminded me so much of my time working as an engineer on ski lifts, as a mechanic, where it's like, we have these like yawn ski lifts. It's like,
we go ahead and talk to, you know, the GM of the ski resort and be like, hey, you do know that we need like some actual modern ski lifts. And you go, why? They seem to be functioning well. It's like, give them a little bit of history lesson. Be like, you do know Jan, literally the name Jan, the guy who built these ski lifts, is now running away. He's like in Argentina somewhere because these ski lifts are so fucking, you know what I mean? But I'm just saying, right? It happens at all levels of culture. I'm surprised it does happen at that level.
Yeah, absolutely. So, right. And there's certain things that you blaze off of maintenance too. Well, right. And every division knows what equipment they're supposed to blaze off. Right. Because the biggest thing about blazing is as long as we know, I guess it's fine, even though it's not fine, right? We just can't do our job because we don't have the resources to fix it. We don't have the time to fix it, right? You know, there's other people involved other than just us. We as nuclear engineers just have to make things work, right? Whether it's the actual equipment and like messing with it to get it to work, or if it's the paperwork behind it, just getting that to show that we're working properly as a proper submarine, right? Mm-hmm. So either system, it doesn't matter. We got to get one of those two things to work to make sure that when people do come and inspect our logs, inspect our submarine, they can just read the paperwork and be, you know, they get the warm and fuzzies like, okay, you guys are doing a great job. Even though on the inside, we know shit's fucked up around here, but we're not trying to tell everyone that.
Exactly. As a novice, just a quick question. How often do you suspect that you get a full refurbishing on the submarine that you're riding on?
Not really full refurbishing, but definitely. So every about year and a half to 2 years, the submarines in San Diego go on a deployment, right? And after every deployment, you're supposed to have 4 to 6 months of dry dock. And that dry dock time is where you're supposed to be fixing everything, right? Another insane thing about the Navy that I want to touch on, they actually have seatbelts on some of the chairs for the watchstanders, right? So when you brace for impact, you just buckle the seatbelt. Anyways, those seats are... they're just metallic seats with this shitty cushion on top, right? We have like basically like a parts order magazine that we order everything from. And they literally have everything on there. But these seats that are metallic with these one cushions, if you bought them in a store, they'd probably be worth $150, right? However, since it's a Navy and we go through government contracting, the people that we've contracted to make them sells it to us for $3,000. Like, there's a lot of like taxpayers' money that goes to these bullshit, like super expensive items that are just, it's pretty insane. It's ridiculous. Yes, they are needed. However, you know, based on certain officers' standards or chief standards in the military, right? Because they're the ones who make the calls that we should replace this, we should place this, we should place this. The seats that we replaced didn't really need to be replaced yet. However, they did show some wear and tear. So like our chief was like, you know what, just go ahead and order new ones. Because nobody cares about money in the military because it's not our money, right? Well, it's everybody's money, I guess, in a sense.
I actually completely understand. Just before we go ahead and end this session of the podcast, this is actually a part of the harsh truth of what happens with, you know, the climate. A lot of people who have money, and we're not talking about the United States. I mean, like, I can take it back to Manchester United, who, you know, one of the wealthiest soccer teams in the world. If, you know, we want a player, right? We want a player. He's actually worth market value $20 million. We're going to pay $50 million. And so America suffers the same exact rule where we end up going in there and they say, well, fuck that. We're not selling to Sweden. We're selling to you. We know how much money you have, so you're going to go ahead and pay that cost. Which is why we outsourced manufacturing, and now we pay head over hand for everything.
The other part of that too is everything on a submarine, it has to be made specifically for a submarine, right? There's no general contractors. There's no machinery like places that produce like these units, these chairs that you can put in your living room, but also they can be used on submarines. Like, that doesn't happen. They have to produce specifically for submarines and how they're built and those specific parts and their designs, right?
And you would assume that America could manufacture their own parts, which we can, and we do, but it just makes it a little bit more difficult.
Yeah. There is one unrelated topic I want to actually talk about. I thought about this a lot. So here's a weird psychological thing with the human mind. the colors that you see on a submarine are all dull. We call them seafoam green. There's grays. There is a little bit of blue in some of the tiles, but generally everything is green and gray. And then the high temp silver is like a shiny silver color. We call it high temp silver. That's mainly steam piping. If you touch it, you'll burn your hand immediately. It's about 400 degrees. Like, I've touched it once. It took like a second. I had skin burning off, right? Like, it was insane. It was madness. But they actually did research with like primary colors. And if they painted submarines in blues and reds and purples and yellows and oranges and all these vibrant colors, it would actually cause human beings to go insane. Like, you would lose your mind being contained in that space with that many colors. And that's why the colors on the submarine are so like dead and dull and not exciting at all. Like, it's a weird thing to think about, but there's a science behind why they do it.
Well, and it's real. And it does happen. I've heard this before, and it's actually an incredible study into the way that people think. There's I'll go ahead and look it up for our next session, but it is one of those where apparently they played. I don't know if it's a Miley Cyrus song or if it's another one, but they legitimately like she's just not a bad artist, by the way. Like, I have no hate. It's one of those where it's like they actually played this for people. Or like a prisoner in actual jail for a certain amount of time, and it drove them fucking wild. So Aaron, I mean, spending 3 years and 9 months on submarines, I've already said it once. Since I've met you, I pretty much labeled you right away as someone who's creative. The term in the new agey online communities is like, they call them creatives. Yeah. Look, we're all creative, but essentially for people with a free spirit, people who are creative and really can't put a top on that. I mean, being on a submarine just sounds, it just doesn't sound like, it sounds too claustrophobic. Forget the normal average person, but someone who needs to express, their thoughts and all that. But you showed me about a month ago, there's the Illinois Emerging Writers book, which you actually have a segment with, and it's a collaboration between various writers. So I just want to go ahead and kind of bring that up and see, your thoughts on that, and maybe
yeah. So like the whole thing, right? I've kept journals my entire life, even in high school. I had a weird project in high school. I called it The Wacky, the Weird, and the Wonderful. I don't have that anymore, but it was a book. My first book comprised of 5 stories, right? So it's only about like 12 pages, right? But I actually was like so proud of it and produced it myself, and like I made copies and gave it out to friends that I cared about and whatever else. But I've continued writing throughout my life in journals, right? The weird thing though is that like every journal, I think that somebody's going to stumble onto at one point, and they're going to read your journal. So I've never written any journal that had the idea of only I would read that journal, so it's kind of weird writing in that sense. But because I've written in that sense, I was able to go back through it and make stories out of it and whatever else. So basically, after I got out of the military, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I lived with my dad for 9 months, right? My parents had just gotten divorced a year before that, so I went to Minnesota to live with my mother. And I ended up going to college there because I had the GI Bill, right? Like, what else was I going to do? I don't know. Mm-hmm. So I went to college there. This is like 2014, 2015, and I took an English 101 class, right? I wanted to go back to college to learn what the rest of these college students get to learn. I get to learn what general ed is, right? Because the nuclear training in the Navy, it's not general ed. They just shoot you straight to what you need to know and the only things you need to know, period, right? There's requirements to get in the nuclear field. They just meet those requirements, right? There's nothing about general ed on there. So I took an English 101 class. The first essay was a narrative essay, right? So I go back through my journals. I have this great story about spending Christmas on a foreign country, or in a foreign country, rather. And that was the year that we went on deployment. We went on deployment in, like, the first day that we left was, like, I think it was December 17th, 2010, right? So we missed Christmas. We missed New Year's. We missed Valentine's Day, right? This is all from yesterday, too.
That's right.
And I started reading through the journal entries, and I found the pieces that all fit around that timeline, and I was able to weave in and out between new narrative that I could write about the story and the raw journal entries, so you could feel what I was feeling during that time. And it worked amazingly. It worked incredibly. The teacher actually gave me an 89% on it, so a B, like not even an A. Out of 300 students, he said, this is the second highest grade for this essay. And then this is after class. He came up to me and he said, you should really think about getting this published in the school magazine, right? And I was like, I was so mad that he gave me a B on this because I put my heart and soul in this. I was crying while I was writing this story, right? It hurt so much to just go back and reread and retell this story. I was just mad. So
there's something beautiful about that. I just want to point out, because I mean, I've heard a lot of people, you know, my age, I'm 27. I'm still working on a degree. I'm working on it very slowly. And it's one of those things where it's like, I hear incredibly accomplished people come back in their 30s. And I'm not saying this, you know, applies to either of us, but they come back in their 30s and they get their degree. And there's a really good note about that where it's like, look, it took me 70 years to get my degree. Does it say that on my fucking diploma? Right? Like, it's like,
yeah.
You know, go ahead and fuck yourself. And it really is an amazing thing. Is like, I'm just speaking to you really, because it's like, I've had a couple classes where it's like, my first paper gets like a 97.
Yeah.
And then the fucking teacher knows I can write like that. And then she goes, fucking, you know, 93. It's like, that paper was better than the last one. She goes, I fucking know. You know what I mean? And then the next one I get like an 89. Like, I barely scrape an A and not an A minus. And she goes, basically gives me a middle finger and goes, you should have done better. And I'm like, fuck you, bitch. But like, it actually means a lot. You know what I mean? So they saw something in you for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So during that class as well, so like another month later, right, the second essay of the class was due, and it was a compare contrast essay. So I was mad going into writing this essay. And I wrote it about submarine life compared to real life, right? And that's where both of those stories have been published now. One's in a book that we're actually both holding the book that the second story is published in. The first story was published in an online magazine for the next college I went to. Let's fast forward it 3 years. I get a job offer out of Chicago. I take that job offer. I'm working 6 months out of the year, get 6 months off. So I decided to go back to college, use my GI Bill, double dip for some more money, right? So I did that. A writing contest comes up, and they had two categories. They had a narrative essay, and they had like a report sort of style writing, right? So I entered my writing in the narrative essay portion, and the judges were 3 women, which really helps me because I'm an emotional writer, right? I cater to women, at least my writing does, right? That they understand me the most when they read my writing. Mm-hmm. So I ended up winning that contest. And because I won it, it was actually published in this Chicago college's online magazine, which was super awesome. For a while there, like, that online magazine doesn't exist anymore. But for like a year or two, I could Google my name in the story, and it would come up like the first thing on Google, and I could show my friends, yeah, I'm published author, look at this. It was so awesome. It was great. A year after that story was published, I got a random email from a publishing company called Z Publishing House. And they're like, hey, we're writing a book called Illinois Emerging Authors, and we want you to submit non-published pieces that could possibly make our book, right? It's just going to be a book comprised of up-and-coming artists, or authors rather, with their stories in it, right? It's a chance for you to get published. I said, all right, cool. So I submitted 4 stories. And the most unsuspecting story to me made the book. It got published. And what was crazy about it is a month after I'd submitted my stories, they got back to me and said, sorry, none of your stories made it. And I was like, what? Like, nothing made it? Like get out of here with that. But then a month after that, they're like, oh, like, we're like rereading your stories, and you actually did make the book. And what's exciting about that is not only did I make the book of, you know, with 25 other authors, my story is the first story in that book. So that generally means that it's the most like exciting or the most attention grabbing, you know, because when you write a story in general, you want something to grab the reader's attention and keep them there, right?
That's right.
So the overall book, like, that's how I take it. Like, mine was probably the best.
All right, I'm going to cut you off, homie.
Yeah,
I'm going to go ahead and just give the first, technically the first few lines, the first paragraph. This is Missing Sunrise by Aaron Erato in the Illinois Emerging Writers and Anthology of Nonfiction. The alarm goes off, and I open my eyes. Fire in the port turbine generator is said over the intercom, and half of the lights go out. I rush to hop out of my bed, along with 20 others in the torpedo room. I throw on my coveralls and run to the crew's mess.
I help Fire Team Oscar get their fire retardant gear on, and the same thing a fireman wears, along with a mask and oxygen tank strapped to their back. The drill instructor shows signs of smoke coming from the engine room. We grab our oxygen masks and hook them to the air supply lines that travel throughout the submarine, then strap them to our faces. It's been about 10 minutes without the port turbine generator running, and because of this, we lost one of the air conditioning machines. It's now about 90 degrees, and it's starting to become really muggy. The watchstanders are lining up the exhaust system to get rid of the simulated smoke inside the submarine. Once the smoke is cleared and the drill instructors are given a plan of attack on how the electrical division is going to troubleshoot the port turbine generator, the drill ends. We take off our gear and wipe the mass off with disinfectant. We spent the next 20 minutes cleaning the gear and getting the submarine back to normal operating conditions. It was mainly the watchstanders doing all the work, so there was time between drills to remember what life was like outside of the submarine, especially when it came to alarms and waking up. I would always set my alarms before going to sleep, and I would always be able to choose what type of tone played for the alarm. I could also hit the snooze button if I needed that extra time to start becoming awake. One of my favorite morning items was coffee, and I gave myself time to sit down and enjoy it while watching the news. Life was actually normal for me outside of the submarine. I lived in San Diego, Pacific Beach specifically, where the weather was the same throughout the year. I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with a roommate who was also stationed on the submarine. Our apartment was a half mile from the college area bars, which was right next to the beach. We had a nice big screen TV where I would mainly watch the History Channel, and because we had cable, we weren't restricted to just watching movies all the time. It's surprising how much you notice the little things after you've been on the submarine for a long period of time.
You got it, my man. It's surprising how much you notice the little things after you've been on a submarine for a long period of time. I used to miss walking out onto the porch. The sun was shining. The skies were blue. You could see strangers jogging. You could breathe in fresh air, and if you got up early enough, you could enjoy the beautiful colors of the sunrise. On the submarine, you can't just walk outside. I often used to dream about the weather, or about what the weather was like as I laid in my rack. The air we breathed was created from the oxygen molecules in the water that surrounded us. It was also recirculated for 24 hours at a time. If we were in safe enough waters, we would suck air in using the induction mast while blowing the old air out through the exhaust. We also had oxygen candles that we burned at 250 degrees, but they were only used when we had to watch our noise levels.
One of my strongest memories was when I got to watch the sunrise. I was on watch in control where the scopes are controlled and the navigation equipment is located. During my watch, I helped with deciphering the frequency signals that we sent out and received back to help us see. I also had a screen that showed what the officer in charge was seeing through the scope. He had to turn the scope 360 degrees to check for anything near us every 5 minutes, but when he left it sitting, he always put it towards the sun. I was on watch for 6 hours, so I got to see an entire sunrise, which is extremely rare on a submarine, from the start where you can see the skies getting brighter but the sun wasn't visible yet, to the beautiful sun as a semicircle rising slowly above the endless amount of water in the ocean. I would get lost in a dream then as well, imagining what it would be like to be outside, feeling the sun's rays bouncing off your skin, feeling the temperature of the air, and the gentle breeze of the wind. I wanted so badly in those moments just to be outside. Back in my apartment, my porch was my place of peace. When the evening came, I would often smoke a cigarette, take a shower, and then just sit and watch the sunset. Unfortunately, on the submarine, the only place for peace was when you were in your rack. Our racks were treated as a sanctuary. It's where we slept, and it was the only place on the sub where we had privacy. We also had a curtain, so it was like being in my own little 2-foot by 6-foot room, just a small taste of home. When I first got to the sub, one of the officers briefed me on a lot of the little things involved in submarine life. For instance, they told us about submarine showers. They take less than 5 minutes, and you had to control the water. You hop in the shower, turn on the water, get yourself wet, then turn off the water. You then apply your body wash and shampoo. Again, you turn the water on and wash everything out. We had to do this because we were only capable of making 300 gallons of potable water every hour. He told us about the smoking area on the submarine. It was located in the back half of the boat, in a bay that was hardly traveled through, and only 3 people could smoke at a time. Smoking was banned on submarines at the end of 2011 due to secondhand smoke research that was done. Our days on the submarine went by in 18-hour cycles. We would stand and watch 6 hours, do maintenance or have free time for 6 hours, and then sleep for 6 hours. I really enjoyed when the evening lined up with my 6 hours of free time. We weren't able to watch the sunset, but we would know it was setting because all the lights in the front half of the boat would change from white to red. The officer also talked about breathing. The officer also talked about berthing, our sleeping quarters. The racks were stacked 3 high in the main berthing areas, and the storage space was the little bit of space under the mattress. You would lift up to find a space 4 inches high by 2 feet wide by 5 feet, 5 inches long. It's surprising what you learn you can fit in there. The space on top of the mattress was only about 1.5 feet high, so you hardly had any room to read a book or move your head. We would put racks in the torpedo room when we didn't have enough stationary racks in berthing to fit everyone. Those racks were portable, and they would put them on the stands that would hold our torpedoes. A lot of times we had torpedoes sitting out ready to be loaded into the torpedo tube, so we would actually be sleeping right next to them.
The oxygen levels on the submarine were controlled between 17 to 19%, while the atmospheric oxygen level was around 21%. They were held at this level to prevent fires. I was briefed on how it would affect me, but you never fully understood until you're breathing in those low oxygen levels. They make you feel drowsy constantly, and you can actually sleep longer at these low levels. I once slept for a whole 24 hours, and I only woke up twice during that time period.
My time on the boat taught me a lot of things about work ethic and learning how to live outside of my comfort zone, but most importantly showed me all the little things in life that people tend to forget. Just being able to look out a window is a great feeling.
I love you. Keep going, man. You got it. Just being able to look out a window.
I will never forget my experiences aboard the submarine. And I am able to appreciate the little things in our daily lives that much more.
Thanks for sharing that, dude. I appreciate you sharing that.
I just want you guys to keep in mind that Aaron really shed his heart there, obviously, if you guys could not tell. And this is going to end up being a 2-part podcast. I know that was 3 hours long. We still have 2 hours of podcasting to go. The next session will actually go ahead and be 1 hour of just Aaron speaking by himself. That will be the latter part of podcast part 2. And the first half will be a little bit more going into the engineering side. So if you're listening to this now, you know kind of how to navigate that one. This means the world to Aaron. So if you do get the opportunity, make sure to go ahead and leave your likes, comments, and all that below. Go ahead and visit him at Aaron Erato on Instagram. Just give him a little bit of a hug, because he's honestly one of the sweetest people I know, one of the easiest people that I know to connect with, and he's been through a lot. I don't think it needs to be said, but support our fucking troops, because it means the world to them, and sometimes you can save people from themselves, even though they're some of the toughest motherfucking people you could ever meet. All right. Have a good night, people. Bye-bye.